Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I moved here 3 weeks ago. I remember feeling a rush of excitement on the day I arrived. I drove all my stuff up the narrow dirt road, parked near the old porch, and carried my boxes inside. The place felt quiet and calm on that first afternoon. The front door was stiff, but I managed to push it open. I dropped my bags in the living room and took a deep breath. The air smelled like damp wood and old paint. I didn't mind. I wanted solitude. I wanted a place where I could clear my head. On my second night here, I noticed something odd. I went to bed around midnight. I remember opening all the windows because it was stuffy. The night air felt good on my face. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that every window in the house was locked tight from the inside. I tried to think if I had gotten up during the night, but I had no memory of it. I even checked the locks to see if something was broken, but everything looked normal. The locks turned easily in my hand when I tested them. I shrugged it off. I was still getting used to the isolation, so I told myself I probably forgot what I did in my half-asleep state. I left it at that. During the days, I felt fine. I unpacked boxes, set up my small kitchen, and tried to clean every corner of the house. The place was old and smelled musty, so I used a lot of disinfectant and left the windows open for hours. The property sits on a hill, surrounded by thick trees. There's a creek at the bottom of the slope. I can hear the water if I stand at the back fence. The view is decent. I sometimes see deer moving through the trees in the late afternoon. They don't seem scared of me, but I keep my distance anyway. Things changed when the nights got quieter. I usually stay up late reading old paperbacks in the living room. The lamp on the table gives off a weak light, so I keep a flashlight near me. The first time I heard something upstairs, I froze. It was around 1 a.m. I heard slow, deliberate footsteps. They sounded like bare feet on the wooden floor above me. The boards creaked in a steady rhythm. I got to my feet and held my breath. My heart was pounding. I listened for a minute. The steps stopped. My legs felt weak. I thought about going upstairs, but I didn't want to. I stayed by the table and waited. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was the house settling or the wind pushing on loose boards. I couldn't relax, but I told myself I'd investigate in the morning. That same night, I heard a scratching noise on the walls. It started near the fireplace, then drifted behind the bookshelf. I walked around slowly, shining the flashlight at the wood panels. I couldn't see any holes or cracks where an animal could sneak in. I spent a while searching for mice, rats, or anything that might make that noise. I saw no droppings, no chewed corners, no signs of pests. The scratching continued in short bursts, then faded away. I tried to stay calm, but my palms were sweaty, and my neck felt tense. I didn't sleep well after that. I kept the flashlight in my hand all night. The next morning, I checked the windows again and found them locked from the inside. I stared at them for a long time. My memory was clear. I had opened them the day before. I didn't understand how they ended up locked again. I decided to ignore it for the moment and focus on chores. I swept the floors upstairs and opened the attic hatch to see what was up there. The attic was dark and smelled like old insulation. The single light bulb hanging from the rafters didn't help much. I moved the beam of my flashlight around and saw dusty boxes, old chairs, and a trunk. Nothing seemed out of place. I tried to see if there was any sign of intrusion, but I didn't find footprints or disturbed cobwebs. Everything looked undisturbed. I heard a creaking sound coming from the far corner, but I figured it was just the wood shifting under my weight. I left the attic alone. That evening, I made a simple meal on the stove. The electricity here is spotty, and sometimes the lights flicker. I keep candles in a drawer just in case. As I was cleaning up the dishes, I felt a chill run down my back. I can't describe it beyond that physical sensation. It felt like I was being watched. I turned around quickly, but I saw only the empty hallway. I turned off the faucet and listened. I didn't hear anything, but I felt uneasy. I walked around the first floor, checking every window and door. Everything was locked. I told myself I was paranoid and tried to read in the living room again. Around midnight, I started hearing the footsteps upstairs. They sounded heavier this time. I forced myself to go check. I climbed the stairs with the flashlight pointed ahead. My hands shook a little and my legs felt tight. The hallway upstairs was dark. I flicked the light switch, but the bulb didn't turn on. I pointed the flashlight down the hall. The footsteps stopped. I walked to each room, opening doors and aiming the beam around. The rooms were empty. I stood there, breathing hard, my heart beating in my ears. Then I heard a slight shuffle behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I swallowed and went back downstairs, feeling my stomach twist. I didn't see anyone or anything. When I woke the next day, I left all the windows open again and made sure to note it in my journal. I wanted to be certain of my memory. At night, once again, I found the windows locked. They were sealed from the inside. I noticed fresh footprints on the floor in the hallway. They were wet, as if someone had stepped in water outside. The shape looked humanoid, but the toes were longer than mine. The footprints had narrow heels and elongated forefeet. I touched one of them. The moisture felt cold. I decided to follow them, but they stopped near the base of the stairs. They vanished at that point. The wood floor looked dry beyond that spot. I felt an immediate rush of panic. My chest tightened. I held my breath and listened. The house was quiet. I spent the next day checking every entrance. The front door, the back door, the windows, even the attic hatch. Everything was locked from the inside. I didn't find any sign of forced entry. The footprints made no sense. I considered the idea that someone might have a key, but the locks aren't standard. They're older and not easy to pick. I checked each lock's mechanism. I didn't see any damage or scratches. That afternoon, I walked around the property outside, looking for signs of trespassers. I saw branches that looked bent near the edge of the forest, and I found some muddy patches by the creek, but I didn't see clear footprints that matched the ones in the hallway. I looked up at the windows of my house from the yard. They felt intimidating in that moment, like they were hiding something behind the glass. But I don't want to read too much into that. I know I'm getting jumpy. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights on. I didn't bother reading. I just waited. I wanted to catch whoever was sneaking around. By 1 a.m., I heard soft tapping upstairs, like fingernails on the walls. My heart beat faster. I rose from my chair, grabbed my flashlight, and walked to the stairs. My mouth felt dry, so I swallowed hard. At the top of the stairs, I heard a faint whisper. It wasn't clear. It sounded like a hushed voice, but I couldn't make out words. I felt a wave of cold sweat on my back. I moved forward, shining the light. The whispering stopped. I stood in the hallway for several minutes. My breathing was shaky. I checked all the rooms again. Nothing was out of place. Then I noticed the attic hatch was slightly ajar. I could see a sliver of darkness up there. I slowly pulled the hatch door down. The ladder creaked. I climbed up one rung at a time. My hands felt clammy, and I gripped the sides of the ladder too hard. At the top, I peeked inside the attic. It smelled damp and stale. The single bulb still hung in the center. I pulled the chain to turn it on, but it flickered and then died. I used my flashlight to scan the space. The dusty boxes looked the same as before. I heard a scraping sound in the corner. I pointed the flashlight there. I saw nothing. I took a few steps on the attic floor. I felt the boards groan under my weight. Then the bulb flickered and turned on by itself. The sudden light made me blink. I looked around quickly, but I didn't see anyone. I decided to back away. My instincts told me to leave. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. When I got back downstairs, I saw those wet footprints again. They led from the hallway to the living room, then disappeared halfway across the floor. I followed them until they vanished. I felt something tighten in my chest and my legs felt shaky. I crouched down and touched the last visible footprint. The water on the floor was cold. My mind raced. I didn't understand how it kept happening. I checked my phone to see if I had a signal. I had one bar, so I dialed a local handyman's number. I wanted someone to check for broken pipes or hidden entrances. I got his voicemail. I hung up and sat there for a while, staring at the empty living room. The next morning, I tried the handyman again. He said he could come by in a week. I felt uneasy waiting that long, but I had no other option. I called a locksmith too, but he was booked. I decided to lock everything up again and see if the footprints appeared during the day. I kept checking, but I only saw them at night. That night, I placed a bucket of water in the hallway to see if whoever was walking around would step in it. I thought maybe I'd hear a splash or see wet footprints leading away. By 2 a.m., I heard faint footsteps above me. I stood in the hallway, flashlight ready, watching the bucket. The footsteps grew louder, moved to the stairwell, and then stopped. There was no splash. There was no movement on the first floor. I stood there, muscles tensed, waiting. I started to feel lightheaded, probably from breathing too fast. Then the footsteps began again, heading back upstairs. I called out, "Who's there?" but got no answer. My voice sounded shaky. The footsteps faded. I checked the bucket. It was untouched. I found new wet footprints on the floor near me, but they didn't pass through the spot where I had placed the bucket. They started after the bucket and continued down the hall, then vanished. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped the flashlight. I tried a different tactic on the 5th night of this ordeal. I set up a small camera in the living room facing the hallway. It was an old camera that records directly to an SD card. I hit record around midnight and made sure the lens was aimed at the floor. I wanted to catch those footprints forming. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the camera's tiny red light. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard light steps moving near the wall upstairs. I stayed put. I heard a quiet scraping sound, then silence. I waited until morning. When the sun came up, I checked the camera. The battery was dead, even though I had charged it fully the day before. The SD card showed empty footage, no images, no sound. I felt frustrated and tired. I barely slept at all, and my nerves were frayed. The next day, I stepped outside to walk around the property. I stood at the edge of the forest looking at the house. The windows stared back. I walked back inside, feeling a knot in my stomach. At that point, I couldn't deny that something strange was happening. I heard whispers in the attic at night. I found footprints in the hallway. I heard footsteps upstairs. The windows locked themselves. Yet I never found a single shred of physical evidence that led me to an intruder or animal. I wasn't sure if I was dealing with something human or not, but I knew I felt trapped in that house at night. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. I opened windows and found them locked the next morning. I cleaned the footprints, only to find new ones the next night. Sometimes I felt like the house was watching me. The old wood paneling seemed to have shapes in the grain. I noticed them more when I was alone in a silent room. I forced myself to ignore it. I told myself to focus on the locks, the footprints, and the attic noises. I called the handyman to check on his availability. He said he'd be out in 2 more days. I marked the date on a piece of paper and pinned it near the front door. I tried to stay calm, but my body felt tense all the time. My shoulders ached from how rigid I was. My forehead felt tight. I drank strong coffee during the day to stay alert. I was running on adrenaline. On the night before the handyman was due, I heard a loud thump at around midnight. I jumped off the couch and grabbed my flashlight. The sound came from the 2nd floor. I hurried upstairs, shining the light. My breathing was loud in my ears, and my heartbeat was fast. I checked each room and found nothing. Then I turned toward the attic hatch. It was open about an inch. I stepped under it and saw that the ladder was partially lowered. I felt a wave of dread. I lifted the ladder gently, pushing the hatch closed. I heard a clicking sound up there, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. My hands shook. I hurried downstairs and stood at the foot of the stairs for a long time, listening. The noises stopped. That brings me to now. It's the next morning. I'm writing this down before the handyman arrives. I want him to check every corner of this house. I want him to inspect the locks, the attic, and the wiring. I'm tired of waking up to locked windows and wet footprints. I'm tired of hearing whispers in the attic. I just want to live in peace. My hands feel clammy while I type this. I keep glancing at the staircase. The house feels tense. It's quiet now, but I sense something overhead. I'm waiting for the handyman to knock on the door. I'm ready to show him everything. I'm sure he'll think I'm imagining things, but I need him to look around. I feel exhausted, like my limbs are heavy. I need to stay calm. I'm gripping my phone, waiting for his call. If he can't find anything, I'll call someone else. I can't live like this. I came here for peace, but I found something else. I hear a creak from upstairs as I finish writing. My stomach clenches. I stand and walk toward the door, ready to let the handyman in the moment he arrives. I'm not letting my guard down until I figure out what's going on in this house. I have no idea if I'll ever feel comfortable sleeping here again, but I have to try. This is my home now, and something upstairs doesn't want me to forget it. I never thought I would lose sleep over an apartment. I never thought I would walk down a hallway and feel my heart pounding so hard that I had to slow down and take a breath. But here I am, and this place is not as charming as the rental ad made it seem. It's cheap, sure. It's old, yes. But there's something else. I'm going to tell you what's been happening here, exactly the way I've experienced it. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just need to get it off my chest because every night around 3 in the morning, I start wondering if I made the worst decision of my life by moving in. I moved in about 3 weeks ago. I'm a single guy in my 30s, and I needed a place that fit my budget. This building is in the historic district, so the outside has decorative columns, and the inner hallways are lined with dark wood paneling. The ceilings are high and the windows are tall but narrow. My apartment is on the 2nd floor, right at the end of a corridor that always seems too dark, even during the day. The landlord said the electrical wiring here is old, so the lights flicker sometimes. I shrugged it off. I just wanted a place that wouldn't cost me a fortune. From the start, I noticed the photos on the hallway walls. They're old black and white pictures of people who used to live here. At least that's what the landlord told me. But their faces in each frame look blurry. It's not like the photos are out of focus everywhere, only the faces are messed up. The rest of the photo is clear enough to see details of clothes or chairs or lamps. I see everything around them just fine. When I walk by them, I feel uneasy, like I'm being watched, even though the faces aren't recognizable. I thought about taking a closer look, but every time I get near them, I feel this tightness in my chest, so I usually hurry past. The apartment itself is small. There's one bedroom, a tiny living room, a narrow kitchen, and a single bathroom. The windows face the courtyard, but there's not much light out there because the building is shaped like a rectangle, and the courtyard is cramped. My living room has an old armchair that came with the place. The upholstery is rough and dark green. The landlord said it was there when the previous tenant moved out, and that I could use it if I wanted. I keep it in the corner by the window. The first night I slept here, I heard a rattling sound from the pipes around 3 in the morning. It sounded like someone was slowly turning on a faucet in another unit, but it kept getting louder. Then it turned into something like a low moan or a hiss. I got out of bed and walked to the bathroom thinking maybe the sink was dripping. Everything was dry. The noise moved behind the walls, like water rushing through old pipes. After a minute, it faded. I wrote it off as old plumbing. In the morning, I barely remembered it, so I didn't think much about it. But the noises continued every night at the same time. Around 3 in the morning, I hear some kind of moan or hiss in the pipes. Sometimes it starts in the bathroom. Other times, I hear it in the kitchen first. It echoes through the walls and it gives me goosebumps. My hair stands up on my arms and I feel my stomach tighten. I tried to ignore it by stuffing earplugs in, but I still sense that weird vibration in the walls. It's like the air pressure changes when it starts. I can't explain it well, but it feels heavy. A few days later, I began noticing something at the end of the corridor near my apartment door. There's a light fixture on the ceiling that flickers at random intervals. It will stay steady for hours, then it starts blinking. I've seen it dim and brighten quickly, like someone is messing with the switch. One night I stepped out into the corridor to throw out the trash, and it started flickering right when I passed under it. I looked down the hall to see if anyone was there. It was empty, but I felt a rush of cold air. My face tingled and I felt short of breath for a few seconds. Then the light settled again. I got back inside and locked my door. I usually lock it right away because this building doesn't feel as safe as my last place. That night I had trouble sleeping, so I just sat in my living room, reading messages on my phone and trying to relax. Around 3, I heard the plumbing sounds again, louder than before. The floor creaked near the bathroom. I know old floors can creak, but this sounded like actual footsteps. I froze. My heart sped up, and my mouth felt dry. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. I put my phone down and got up slowly, looking toward the hallway. My apartment is small, so I can see the bathroom door from the living room. It was open, but I didn't see anything unusual. I took a few steps in that direction, and the pipe sounds stopped. No more moaning or hissing, just silence. When I turned around, I thought I saw a shape in the living room, right in front of the armchair. The overhead light was off, so only a small lamp near my couch was on. It was enough to see the outline of someone. I blinked and leaned forward, but as soon as I focused, there was nothing there. The armchair looked empty. I felt a chill run from my neck to my lower back, and my legs felt weak. I looked around the kitchen, checked the front door. Everything was locked. I made sure all the windows were shut. The next day, I was jumpy. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about the shape I thought I saw. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I told myself I was tired, but I kept picturing it in my head. That night I came back and passed those old photos in the corridor. The faces were still blurry. I think about them sometimes. Who are those people? Did they die here? Did they move away? I wanted to ask the landlord, but I felt silly. The landlord is a distant guy who only shows up for rent or repairs. A few days later, I was sitting on the couch in my living room, watching something on my laptop. It was late, probably around midnight. I started dozing off when I heard a scraping noise near the window. I sat up. The room was dark, except for the glow of my laptop screen. I closed the laptop and listened. It sounded like someone was sliding a hand along the glass, but when I pulled the curtain aside, there was nothing. The courtyard was dark, and I couldn't see a single person outside. Then I heard a faint pop in the pipes, and it made me jump. I decided to go to bed. I turned off the lights, locked everything, and got under the covers. About 3 in the morning, the sounds returned, but this time they were louder than ever. The pipes rattled for a while, then started making that low moan. My heart pounded, and I flipped on the bedside lamp. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, breathing fast. I heard a loud clank in the living room, like something hit the floor. I got up, feeling shaky, and walked out of the bedroom. The living room light was off, but I could see a shadow on the wall. It looked like someone was sitting in the armchair. I could see the outline of shoulders, arms, a head. My heart rate spiked, and my mind went blank. I reached for the light switch by the door, flipped it on, and the shape vanished. The armchair was empty. But when I touched the chair's cushion, it felt warm, like someone was just there. I swear I felt a bit of warmth on the seat. It lasted for a few seconds, then it faded. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat on my couch, every nerve on edge. I listened for more sounds, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I passed out for maybe an hour or 2. In the morning, I felt exhausted. I left for work and tried to stay busy, but my mind kept drifting back to the armchair and the warm seat cushion. I know how insane it sounds. There's no reason for it to be warm. It's never in direct sunlight. I don't own a pet. It's not near a heater. It only gets warm when I think I see someone sitting there. The next night, I tried to keep all the lights on in the apartment. The living room, the kitchen, even the bathroom. I felt uneasy walking around in the dark. Around 10, the overhead light in the living room flickered, so I used a floor lamp instead. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying not to imagine things. At some point, I heard something in the corridor outside my door. It sounded like a quiet shuffle. I muted my phone and listened. Nothing. But I couldn't relax. I went to the peephole and looked out. The hall was dim. That single light near my door flickered once, then stopped. No one was there. I tried going to bed around midnight. I made sure all the doors were locked. I left my bedside lamp on. I watched the clock as it approached 3. At 2:58, the pipe sounds started. They weren't as loud as before, but they had that moaning quality again. Then as the minute hand hit 3, I heard a soft whisper. It was close to my ear. I felt the hair on my neck stand up and a chill spread across my chest. I'm sure I heard something like, "You arrived?" in a hushed voice. I jumped out of bed, my hands shaking. I looked around the room. No one was there. My windows were locked. My door was locked. But I could feel my body trembling. My palms were sweaty, and my throat felt dry. I stayed up until dawn, sitting in my living room with every light on. I stared at the corridor outside the bedroom. I kept glancing at the armchair. I fought the urge to check if it was warm. I didn't want to know. At 5:30 in the morning, I heard the pipes clank again, but it was a normal noise like water pressure changing. I realized the moaning and hissing had stopped an hour earlier. Sunrise came, and I got ready for work, completely drained. The next few nights followed a similar pattern. The corridor light flickered. The pipes moaned around 3. I heard soft footsteps in the living room. Sometimes I spotted a shape in the corner of my eye, near that armchair. Once, I approached it slowly, holding my breath. I pressed my palm against the seat. It was warm again. It felt like a body was just there. I yanked my hand back. My heart hammered in my ears. I tried to breathe slowly, but my chest felt tight. I felt dizzy, like I might pass out. I braced myself against the couch and waited until the light-headed feeling passed. 2 days ago, I decided to call the landlord. I told him the plumbing was making strange noises at night. He said he'd send someone to check it out. A plumber came the next day, walked around, ran the water in the bathroom and kitchen. He said the pipes are old, but there's no sign of leaks or serious problems. He said it might just be the building settling and the water pressure changing overnight. He left a card and told me to call if it gets worse. I wanted to mention the flickering light and the strange photos, but I felt stupid. He was just a plumber. He wouldn't do anything about it. Last night was the worst so far. I went to bed around midnight. I actually fell asleep for a while, which was unusual. But at exactly 3, I woke up to the loudest moan from the pipes I've heard yet. It sounded like it was coming from inside my bedroom wall. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing. The bedroom felt cold. I could see my breath in the air. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight. When I shined it around, I saw the bedroom door was open, even though I had closed it before going to bed. My bedroom door never just opens on its own. I ran my hand over my face, trying to stay calm. I walked into the living room. My phone's flashlight showed the armchair. It looked empty as always. Then the overhead light flickered on by itself. My phone's light wasn't bright enough to see the whole space at once, so I switched on the lamp near the couch. That's when I felt something close behind me. The hair on my arm stood up, and I heard a quiet whisper again. "You arrived?" I spun around, breathing hard. I didn't see anyone. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I kept scanning the room, but it was empty. The front door was locked. The windows were locked. I stood there in the living room, tense for at least a minute. My lungs felt tight and my hands were shaking. I decided I couldn't stay in that room, so I walked into the kitchen. I turned on the ceiling light and stood by the counter, just listening. I heard the pipes moan again, and I heard a gentle thump in the living room, like someone had put something down on the floor. My chest felt heavy and I had trouble swallowing. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet, filled it with water from the tap, and drank it. My hand shook so much that I spilled some on the floor. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My mouth tasted sour from nerves. I must have stood in the kitchen for half an hour just waiting. Eventually I peeked into the living room. The lights were still on, and the armchair was still in the corner. It didn't look different, but I didn't feel safe. I stayed up until dawn again. I watched the shadows change on the walls as the sun came up. The temperature returned to normal, and I finally relaxed enough to sit on the couch. This place isn't worth the low rent anymore. I'm on edge all the time. The photos in the hallway still have those blurry faces, and I hate walking past them. The lights flicker every night, even though the landlord says nothing is wrong with the wiring. The pipes make sounds at 3 in the morning without fail, and I keep thinking I see a silhouette in that old armchair. Sometimes it's just a flash, sometimes it stays for a moment. Whenever I check, the seat is warm, and every once in a while, I hear that whispered question, "You arrived?" It sounds like a breath against my ear. I jump every time. I don't know how long I can take this. My lease is month to month. I might pack up and leave soon, but right now I'm still here, waiting for another night to pass, hoping I can keep my eyes open until morning. That's all I can say. I wish I had a better explanation, but there isn't one. This is what happens here, and it's always the same question in that faint whisper. "You arrived?" I never answer, but it keeps asking. And I can't shake the feeling that one night I'll find whoever is supposed to be sitting in that chair. Then I might finally figure out why this place was so cheap. Until then, I'm here doing my best to get through the nights. I walked into the hotel lobby on a cold Tuesday evening, expecting a typical check-in. The moment I set foot inside, something felt off. The lights in the lobby were dim, and the floor creaked under my shoes. A single front desk clerk stood behind the counter, watching me with a flat stare. She handed me a worn key labeled Room 14, without a word of welcome. She just slid the key across the desk, asked me to sign the guest book, and pointed to the hallway behind me. I tried to ask if the kitchen was still open, but she only shrugged and turned away. That was my first sign that this place wasn't normal. I followed the corridor as the clerk indicated. It was long and felt cramped, with walls that seemed to close in on me. The carpet looked older than anything I had seen in modern hotels, dark brown and patched in places. My steps echoed, which made me realize how empty the place was. Doors lined each side of the corridor, all numbered in plain black metal digits. The hall smelled like stale air. I noticed a faint buzzing sound overhead, probably from the ancient lighting. After a few turns, I finally reached a door marked with a faded 14. But something else drew my attention before I even slipped the key in the lock. There was a door right next to mine, but it had thick chains wrapped around the handle and a big sign that said, "Do not enter." There were padlocks on the chains. The paint around that door was chipped away, revealing the old wood underneath. I stood there for a moment, staring at the locks and the sign. The corridor was silent, except for that buzzing overhead. I remember feeling a slight chill and an urge to check if I was on the right floor. I glanced at the key in my hand, confirming it said Room 14. I looked back at the door with all those chains. I shook it off and entered my room. It was small. The bed was pushed against the left wall, and there was a single window on the other side. The lamp next to the bed had a flickering bulb. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet was stained in spots. It smelled musty. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and sat on the bed. My plan was to go over some paperwork for my business meeting the next morning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this hotel wasn't right. I went into the bathroom to wash my face. The water in the sink took a full minute before it turned from rust-colored to clear. The mirror above the sink was chipped around the edges. When I looked at my reflection, I noticed my eyes looked more tired than usual. I chalked it up to a long day of travel. I left the bathroom and sat at the small desk in the room to get some work done. A single overhead light hummed. I opened my laptop, trying to focus on my reports. A couple of hours passed in relative silence. Then, sometime around midnight, I heard something through the wall. It was like hushed voices or muffled laughter. I paused, turned my head, and realized it was coming from the direction of that chained door. At first I thought maybe it was just other guests, but the hallway had been empty. I remembered the warning sign, "Do not enter." I heard a light thump, and then what sounded like a giggle, as if multiple people were in there, talking or having some sort of gathering. The voices sounded distant but clear enough to recognize them as human. I walked to the wall and pressed my ear against it. The laughter continued for a few seconds, then stopped. My heart pounded. I opened my room door and stepped into the corridor. It was dark, except for a single flickering light near the far end. I looked at the chained door. The sign was still there, the chains still in place. No hint of movement from outside. I approached it, noticing how the metal locks looked almost rusted shut. The laughter didn't start up again, but I could feel my pulse in my temples. I reached out, pushed gently on the door, but it didn't budge. Then I tried the keyhole. When I crouched down to look through the keyhole, a sudden blast of cold air hit my eye. It made me jerk back and almost lose my balance. My skin tingled. I felt goosebumps spread across my arms. It was like opening a freezer door, except there was no reason for any air to blow through. I stood up and listened. Nothing. No laughter, no whispering. Just a heavy silence. I went back to my room, shut the door, and tried to sleep. My heart was still racing. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The flickering lamp cast weird shadows across the walls. I kept thinking about that cold air and the giggling. I must have fallen asleep at some point, but it wasn't restful. I jolted awake a few times, each time thinking I heard footsteps outside, but every time I got up and checked, the hallway was empty. I remember looking at the time on my phone, 3:27 a.m., then 4:12 a.m., then 5 a.m. By morning, I felt exhausted. I went downstairs for breakfast. A small dining area had a few tables, and I noticed only 2 other guests, a middle-aged couple who seemed to be having a quiet meal. I could hear a radio behind the kitchen door, some newscaster droning on. I got myself a coffee from the self-serve station. The front desk clerk from the night before was gone. A different staff member was at the reception. She had a blank expression when I asked about the door in the corridor. I told her there was a door next to room 14, locked up with chains. I asked if there was any reason for the sign. She just stared at me for a moment, like she didn't understand. Then she told me there wasn't any door like that. I thought maybe she was new or something. I tried to explain, but she kept saying there were only rooms 10 through 14 on that corridor, no extra doors. I insisted, saying I'd seen it myself and heard noises coming from inside. She said I was probably confused. Her tone was cold. She told me to enjoy my stay and turned to a stack of papers on the desk, dismissing me. That day, I left for my business meeting. I tried to focus on my work, and for the most part, I managed to push the strange events to the back of my mind. But by the end of the day, the memory started creeping back. On the drive back to the hotel, I felt a growing tension in my stomach. When I stepped through the lobby doors that evening, the same clerk from the previous night was there again. She handed me my key when I asked for it, not making eye contact. I walked the same corridors, noticing each turn. This hotel was like a maze. It had random offshoots and corners that didn't seem to match the building's exterior shape. Eventually, I reached my door again. And sure enough, the chained door was still next to it. I felt a tug of fear when I saw it. I went inside my room, locked the door, and decided to order some food. After I ate, I tried to watch something on my laptop, but the Wi-Fi was spotty. The hours passed slowly. Around midnight, the voices started again. They were louder this time, still muffled, but I could definitely make them out as some kind of conversation. Occasionally, there was laughter, short bursts of it, like a group sharing a joke. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I thought about calling the front desk, but I suspected they'd just deny everything again. This time, I decided to be more direct. I left my room and stood in front of the chained door. The corridor felt colder than before. I turned on the flashlight of my phone to get a better look at the locks. They were thick and old, with layers of rust. The chain was wrapped so many times around the handle that I couldn't see any gap. Then I put my ear to the door. I heard faint murmurs, like people whispering or moving around. My heart thudded in my chest. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be in there, but I didn't sense anything evil, just something hidden. I tried the keyhole again. I felt a slight draft, not as strong as the night before, but it was still cold. My hands were shaking. I felt a tightness in my throat. I could smell something old, like damp wood. My flashlight flickered for a moment, and that startled me enough to step back. Then I heard a scrape, like metal dragging across the floor on the other side of the door. It sent a spike of adrenaline through my body. I quickly retreated to my room and locked the door. I couldn't sleep. The voices went on for a while. Around 2 a.m., they stopped. I stayed awake in bed, every muscle tense. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my forehead, but I also felt cold at the same time. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of endless corridors and locked doors. In my dream, I tried to open them, but they wouldn't budge. In the morning, I went to the front desk again. A different employee was there. I asked him if there was a manager I could talk to. He said the manager was unavailable. I demanded an explanation about the locked door next to room 14. He looked at me like I was talking nonsense. He insisted there wasn't any extra door. He even pulled out a small map of the second floor and showed me the layout. Rooms 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. No mention of another door. I pointed to where it should be, but the map just showed a blank section of wall. I was growing frustrated. I told him about the voices, the laughter, the cold air. He started to look nervous, as if I was accusing him of something. He swore up and down that there were only 5 rooms in that corridor. I realized I wasn't going to get anywhere with him, so I left. I found a small lounge area where I could sit on a worn-out couch. I texted a friend about the situation, but I got no real advice, just jokes about haunted hotels. I wasn't laughing. That evening, I forced myself to stay out late, grabbing dinner in town. I hoped that if I returned late enough, I'd be too tired to notice any weird noises. But as soon as I stepped into that corridor, I felt the same tension. The door was still there, still chained, still displaying "Do not enter." I went straight into room 14, flicked on the lights, and closed myself in. I tried to distract myself with work, but around midnight the sounds started again. This time they were even clearer. I heard distinct words, though I couldn't make out full sentences. It sounded like multiple people speaking quietly, sometimes laughing. Every fiber of my body told me to stay away. But curiosity won. I grabbed my phone and carefully opened my door. The corridor lights were dimmer than usual. A quick look around showed me no one else was out there. I walked up to the chained door. The laughter stopped as if they heard me. My heart pounded. I turned my phone light on and examined the door again. The chains looked the same, the padlocks in place, no sign of tampering. Still, I heard faint breathing or movement inside. My mouth felt dry. I reached out and tried to tug the chain. It rattled, and for a second I thought I heard movement behind the door. A shuffle on the floor, maybe. I took a deep breath, pressed my ear against the wood, and tried to hear more. There was a slight creak, like someone leaning against the other side. My scalp tingled. That was enough. I pulled back and hurried to my room, shutting myself in. I stood there in the dark for a moment, my breath coming quick. Then I turned the lock and put on the safety chain. I couldn't sleep that night. The voices would come and go, drifting in and out. Once I thought I heard a knock on the wall next to my bed. It was faint, but it made me sit up straight. I called the front desk using the room phone, but the line just rang and rang. Around 3 a.m., everything went quiet. I finally dozed off, though I kept waking up to check the time. On my last day, I felt drained. My eyes stung from lack of sleep. I had to check out, but part of me wanted to find proof of that door. As I packed my suitcase, I heard a soft whisper, almost like my name being called, but it was too faint to be sure. I shook it off and left the room. The corridor was silent again. The door with the chains was still there, unchanged. At the front desk, I didn't see the manager or the clerk, just a new person who had me sign the paperwork for checkout. I asked a final time about the chain door. He blinked at me, clueless. I decided not to push it. I figured it wasn't worth the frustration. I just wanted to get out of that hotel. I walked out to my car, tossing my bag in the back seat. When I started the engine, I glanced at the second floor windows. I saw a shape move behind a curtain in what should be room 14. My room. The curtain shifted and the light was on, but I knew I'd turned all the lights off before leaving. My stomach flipped. Then for a second, I spotted another figure at the window next to it, where that locked door would be. I felt my heart leap to my throat. The shape didn't move. It just stood there, barely visible behind the dusty glass. I drove off, not looking back. As I left the parking lot, I felt relief wash over me. My arms were tense and I could feel sweat on my palms, but the further I got from that building, the better I felt. Even so, my mind kept returning to the memory of those voices, the cold air, the denial from the staff, and that final glimpse of a figure in the window. I didn't know what was going on in that place, but I was certain I didn't want to be there another night. I kept telling myself it was just some old building with quirks. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. And I knew I never wanted to set foot in that hotel again. I noticed something was wrong the day my headphones started playing a strange tune when they weren't even plugged in. I was alone in the studio, adjusting a few cables on the mixing console. The booth was quiet except for the slight hum of the ventilation system. I had turned off every piece of equipment except the overhead light and the power conditioner. I glanced down at my headphones lying on the desk. They were closed back, black, and well worn. Then I heard this low droning melody coming from them. It was so faint that I thought I might be imagining it, but it got louder. I picked up the headphones to confirm, and the sound definitely came from inside the ear cups. I work in a small recording studio on the edge of town. There's one main live room, one control room, and a narrow hallway lined with foam acoustic panels. The place doesn't see a lot of clients, but it's enough to keep the lights on. My job is to record and mix sessions, maintain the gear, and keep track of microphone placement. I'm used to background noise, hum from amps, hiss from cheap mixers, random interference from cell phones, but this was something else. I double-checked that no device was transmitting a signal. No microphone was hot, no console channel was open. The tune played on its own, like it was broadcasting from somewhere else. I held the headphones up to my ear. There was a dark, steady pulse in the background like an electronic beat. Over that beat, I heard soft chanting. The voices seemed distant, but they shifted in pitch. I removed the headphones immediately. My heart thumped. I realized I was sweating. I moved a few steps back. The room felt tighter than before. I couldn't hear the sound anymore once the headphones were off, so I set them on the desk and tried to calm down. I stood there for a minute, looking at the headphones from a few feet away. They were silent now. I walked around the console, checking if I had left anything on. Nothing was active. I leaned in and picked them up again. This time I put them on my head to make sure. Right away, the same droning melody returned. It was more intense. The chanting was layered with odd whispers. The whispers overlapped, like multiple voices talking at once. I caught a brief word or two, something that sounded like my name. I yanked the headphones off. My ears rang for a second. I placed the headphones on the desk again, and the ringing faded. I had no explanation. I grabbed a cable tester, just in case there was a weird short in the headphones. The moment I tried to plug them in, though, I realized it made no difference. The music continued, regardless of whether the cable was attached. When the headphones were near my ears, I heard that grim drone, a slow pulsing rhythm and those whispers. When they were off, there was silence. I felt this growing knot in my stomach. My mouth went dry. I leaned against the wall to steady myself. I took a few deep breaths and looked at the clock. It was late, and I decided to lock up and go home. I tried to ignore the headphones for the night. I packed up the rest of my gear and made sure the studio was secure. But I found myself hesitating before leaving. Part of me wanted to leave the headphones behind. Another part felt uneasy leaving them alone. I decided to take them with me because they were mine, and I didn't like the idea of someone else stumbling on them. I walked to my car in the empty parking lot. The wind had picked up and the streetlights flickered. I opened my car door, tossed the headphones on the passenger seat, and got in. During the drive, I kept glancing at them. They looked innocent. They didn't make a sound. But I felt unsettled. At home, I set the headphones on my coffee table. My apartment is small, a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a couch. I threw my keys on the counter, grabbed a bottle of water, and sat down. I switched on the TV for background noise. My mind kept drifting to those sounds I'd heard. I turned the TV volume up, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, curiosity won. I muted the TV and slowly reached for the headphones. My hands shook a little. I put them on. There was a low rumble. Then the beat started, that deep thump, thump, thump. A droning tone rose and fell. It felt like an electronic wave pressing into my ears. Then the chanting arrived. At first it was impossible to distinguish words. As it grew in volume, I heard them breathing, like they were chanting in time with the beat. Then the whispers started. They were scattered like several voices in different corners of a room. I kept listening, hoping to find a pattern. My heart pounded. The voices said my name at least twice. I gripped the headphones, and my arms tensed. I ripped them off in a rush. A strange distortion lingered in my hearing. I looked around my living room. For a few seconds, I swear I saw shadows flickering by the walls. They looked like they were moving in sync with the beat, even though I wasn't wearing the headphones anymore. My vision blurred, then refocused. My hearing came back to normal. The TV was still muted, my breath was shaky, and my hands felt cold. I stood up and walked around my place, checking every corner. I turned on all the lights. I didn't see anything. The headphones sat on the coffee table, silent again. I got ready for bed, but I left the headphones in the living room. I didn't want them anywhere near me while I tried to sleep. That night I had a hard time closing my eyes. Every little sound made me jump. The humming of my refrigerator felt too loud. The ticking clock in the kitchen pulsed in my ears. At one point, I thought I heard chanting from the hallway. I got up to check, but there was nothing. I ended up sitting on the couch with the lights on until I dozed off. In the morning, I felt stiff and groggy. My phone alarm was the only reason I woke up. I forced myself to get dressed and drive to the studio. I left the headphones on the coffee table. My entire ride there, I was on edge. Traffic sounds felt sharper. Other drivers' horns made me flinch. My head pounded with a dull ache. I arrived at the studio a bit late, so I went straight to my tasks. I had a session with a local band that afternoon. Setting up microphones and test recordings distracted me for a while. During a break, my coworker asked if I was okay. He said I looked pale. I just told him I didn't sleep well. We did the session without problems. When we finished, I lingered in the control room alone. I looked around at the racks of equipment, cables, and monitors. I wondered if the headphones were picking up some random frequency, or if there was a logical explanation. I decided to call a friend who knows about rare electronic issues. I described the situation in plain terms. He laughed at first. Then he said it might be electromagnetic interference or a radio signal crossing over. I considered that, but it didn't explain the voices repeating my name. He shrugged it off and said maybe I was imagining it. I thanked him and hung up. I stayed at the studio late that night to do some personal experiments. I had other pairs of headphones there, so I ran a few tests. I tried playing the same reference track through each pair, making sure everything was normal. I listened carefully for unusual noise. Nothing. I borrowed another friend's headphones and repeated the process. Still nothing. I realized that the strange phenomenon only happened with my pair. Even if I didn't plug them in, they played that dark melody. I felt a surge of anxiety. My palms got sweaty and I had to step outside to get some air. I stood in the parking lot, looking at the quiet street. A few cars passed. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The air felt heavy on my skin. I took a long breath and decided to face this problem head on. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the control room with my headphones in front of me on the desk. I reached out, took them, and held them up to my ears. The sound came in immediately, like turning on a switch. That same droning pulse, the chanting, the whispers. I tried to focus on the words this time. My pulse raced. My forehead felt damp. The chanting seemed to stretch out and the voices blended into each other. Then one voice cut through the rest and said my name. It sounded direct and strained. I pulled the headphones off. My hearing was warped again. I heard that pulse in the background, even though the headphones were no longer on my head. My vision blurred and I saw a faint shape in the corner of the control room. It was dark, shifting, but it seemed to move in time with the beat. I froze. My chest tightened. My breathing went shallow. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, my vision cleared and the shape was gone. I heard the hum of the ventilation again. The distortion faded. My heart pounded. I got up and left the control room, leaving the headphones on the desk. I felt like I was losing my grip. My mind kept racing with questions. I paced in the hallway, running my hands through my hair. I felt a chill in my body, even though the AC was off. I wanted to throw the headphones in the trash, but I worried that somehow they would still find a way to produce that horrific sound. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Eventually, I grabbed a plastic bag from the supply closet and put the headphones inside. I sealed it and took it to my car. I placed it in the trunk. I thought if I kept them far away from me, maybe I could get some peace. I drove back to my apartment, forcing myself not to look in the rearview mirror too often. When I got home, I checked every room before turning off the lights. I tried to watch TV to relax, but I couldn't concentrate. My ears felt like they were searching for that sound. Occasionally, I thought I heard a low hum, but maybe it was just traffic outside or the pipes in the walls. I drifted into a restless sleep on my couch. In the middle of the night, I woke up gasping for air. My ears were ringing. I reached up to cover them, and I realized I was hearing that same melody in my half-awake state. I jumped off the couch, switched on the lights, and paced around. It faded after a few seconds, but my heart was beating so fast it hurt. The next morning, I couldn't shake that sense of dread. My body felt weak. I forced myself to shower and eat something. My plan was to get rid of the headphones, but I wasn't sure how. I didn't want to throw them in the dumpster behind my building because they might still be there if I changed my mind. I thought about leaving them at the studio, but I couldn't do that to my coworkers. I contemplated smashing them, but something in me resisted. I felt like they were latched onto me somehow, and breaking them might make it worse. That thought made me shiver. I decided to go back to the studio again, but first, I popped open my trunk to check on the headphones. They were still sealed in the plastic bag. I stared at them for a second, then closed the trunk and drove. At the studio, I had no sessions that day, so the place was empty. I went inside, left the lights off, and walked straight to the control room. I turned on a single lamp. The atmosphere felt dense. I grabbed the bag from the trunk and placed it on the console. My hands shook, and I felt short of breath. I opened the bag. The headphones just looked like normal headphones. I touched them, and they felt cool to the touch. I held them up, resisting the urge to put them on. My instincts told me not to do it, but I needed answers. So I slipped them over my ears. The melody rushed in louder than ever. The droning beat pulsed in my ears. My body tensed. My chest felt tight. The chanting sounded like a crowd of voices rising and falling. The whispers circled my head. Some voices were slow, others fast. Then I heard my name repeated in a drawn-out tone. My entire body felt prickly. My mouth went dry. The chanting turned into layered muttering, like they were arguing among themselves. I heard scratching noises, as if someone was dragging a sharp object across metal. I froze in place. Suddenly, one whisper cut through the chaos and repeated my name again. It sounded like it was right inside my ear. I tore the headphones off and threw them on the desk. My ears kept ringing. The pulses lingered. and I felt my vision blur once more. I saw those dancing shapes in the corners of the room. They wavered like shadows cast by an unseen light. My legs felt weak, and I nearly fell. I gripped the edge of the desk. I told myself to calm down, but my heart felt ready to burst out of my chest. The shadows kept swaying for a few seconds before disappearing. Then the air felt normal again. I swallowed hard and looked at the headphones lying there. They were silent once more. I wrapped them in the plastic bag again and stood there. My hands were clenched. My jaw felt tight. I stared at the console. I considered turning on the monitors and blasting white noise to see if it would cancel out the weird audio. But something about that felt pointless. The headphones had a life of their own. No normal sound test would fix this. My shoulders felt heavy. I pressed my hands against them, trying to steady my breathing. I thought about possible next steps. I looked at the hallway, the studio door, and the small lounge area. Everything was quiet. I could only hear my own pulse. I decided I couldn't keep living with these things. I walked outside to the back of the building. There's a metal storage shed where we keep old mic stands and broken equipment. I opened the shed, tossed the bag inside, and locked the door. Then I just stood there for a moment, breathing in and out. The afternoon sun was bright, and it hurt my eyes. I felt that the headphones were still too close to me, but at least they weren't in my hands anymore. My ears felt hypersensitive, like I was waiting to hear that creepy melody again. I stood there for a long time, waiting. Nothing happened. Eventually, I went back inside, switched off the lamp, and sat in the lounge. That was a few hours ago. I'm still here watching the clock. My hands won't stop shaking. I keep glancing down the hallway toward the shed. I wonder if I'll ever hear that melody again. My body feels jumpy. My heart is still beating harder than usual. My mind replays those voices. I can't shake the feeling that they know me. I try to push the thought away. I don't hear the chanting right now, which is a relief. But I can't be sure it's gone for good. Every so often I think I hear a faint pulse, but I might be imagining it. I don't know what I'll do next. I haven't decided if I should destroy the headphones or leave them locked in that shed forever. Part of me wants to drive somewhere remote and drop them off. Another part wonders if they would somehow find their way back. I don't have a solid plan. All I know is I need to get out of this studio soon. My chest feels tight again. I'm standing up now and heading for the door. My car's parked out front. The air outside might help me calm down. I'm not sure if any of this will ever make sense, but I need to clear my head. My headphones played a melody with no logical source, and those whispers spoke my name. That's all I know. And I can't stay here much longer. I'm leaving. I'm done. I never thought anything strange could happen in my condo. This place has always been calm. The units are clean, people keep to themselves, and there's hardly any drama. For the past 5 years, I've enjoyed a routine of coming home, turning on the TV, making dinner, and falling asleep without worrying about the outside world. My building stands next to an empty lot, and there's a single twisted tree in that lot. I've stared at it countless times from my bedroom window. It always looked bare with knobby branches that bend in odd angles. I used to think it was a little ugly, but it never bothered me. Now I can't look at it without feeling tense. Something changed one night, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I first noticed it about 3 weeks ago. It was around midnight, and I was having trouble sleeping. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. The tree was there, as always, but it looked different. The shape of the trunk seemed off, like there was something blocking part of it. I leaned closer to the glass, trying to see better. It was dark, and the street lights don't reach that spot very well, but I could make out a faint silhouette. At first I thought it was maybe a piece of trash or a broken branch that had fallen. Then I noticed it was a person, or at least, it looked like a person. My heart started racing. I couldn't see any details, just a white outline. It was sitting on one of the thicker branches facing my window, completely still. I felt a jolt of adrenaline run through my chest. I wasn't sure if I should turn on the lights or grab my phone. I stood there, staring, waiting for it to move. I felt a prickling sensation across my shoulders and my breathing got shallow. I asked myself what kind of person would climb into that crooked tree in the middle of the night. The possibility of it being a prank crossed my mind, but something about it felt wrong. I felt this deep sense of unease. Then I heard a voice. It was soft, like a whisper carried by the wind, but clear enough to make me jump. It said my name. I heard it come from outside, even though my window was closed. My chest tightened and I froze in place. I remember trying to speak, but only getting a dry throat. I backed away from the window, checking the lock to make sure it was secured. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. I turned on my bedroom light, grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand, and slowly pulled the curtain back again. With the flashlight aimed at the tree, I expected to see the figure illuminated. Instead, I saw just the branches, twisted as usual, but empty. No one was there. I was shaking. I stood there for a good minute or so, scanning every part of that tree. Nothing. I thought maybe I had imagined it all. I felt a little silly, but I couldn't ignore the tension in my gut. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was just fatigue. Eventually, I turned off the flashlight, closed the curtain, and sat on my bed for a while. My body was damp with sweat, even though the night was cool. The next day, I tried not to think about it. I went to work, did everything normally, and told myself it was just some shadow. When I got home, I opened my bedroom window to let in some fresh air. I glanced at the tree more out of curiosity than actual concern. That's when I noticed 3 small pieces of paper stuck to the trunk. They were pinned there with a piece of tape, each about the size of a sticky note. I thought it was just random trash, but something about them stood out. They were too clean, not weather-beaten at all, which meant they hadn't been there long. I walked outside and crossed to the lot. It's fenced, but the gate was open. I checked around to make sure no one saw me. It felt strange to be snooping, but I wanted to see what those notes said. As I got closer, I saw that the handwriting looked exactly like mine. But it wasn't my writing. The letters were shaped like mine, yet they were uneven, like someone was imitating my style. I felt a chill spread through my arms and neck. My stomach tightened. I looked at the first note, which said something simple. I see you. The second said, you shouldn't look. The third said, I told you. That was it. Nothing else. No name, no signature. I peeled the notes off the trunk, folded them, and put them in my pocket. My heart was beating faster, and I tried to think logically. Maybe someone in the complex was messing with me. But how did they copy my handwriting so closely? And why? I stood there for a minute, scanning the area. The tree looked normal again. Just an old, twisted trunk with branches reaching toward my window. There was no one else around, and the lot was empty. I felt exposed, standing there in plain sight, so I walked back to my condo. That night, I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was some kind of sick joke. My mind kept racing, and I paced around my living room. I checked the locks on my door twice before heading to my bedroom. I closed the curtains but left a small gap so I could peek outside if I heard anything. Around 11 p.m., I turned off the lights and lay in bed feeling restless. My ears were tuned to every small noise. I could hear the quiet hum of my ceiling fan, the faint buzz of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the distant sound of a car passing by on the street. I was too keyed up to drift off. At some point I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember is hearing my name again. It was that same soft voice, coming from outside. I jolted upright, my heart pounding. My skin felt clammy. I turned my head toward the window. The curtain was still closed. Part of me wanted to hide under the covers, but I had to know if something was out there. I slowly got up, took the flashlight from my nightstand, and approached the window. I peeked through the small gap in the curtain. My chest seized when I saw the same white outline sitting on the same branch. It was so still that it looked unnatural, like a statue or a painting. My breath caught, and I felt a wave of nausea. Every hair on my body stood on end. The voice came again, more urgent this time, saying my name in a drawn-out whisper. I remember the exact feeling of my pulse echoing in my ears. My hand trembled as I switched on the flashlight and aimed it at the tree. The beam lit the trunk, the branches, and the whole shape of it. The silhouette vanished as soon as the light touched it. I yanked the curtain shut, my chest heaving. I stayed there panting, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles hurt. I couldn't sleep after that. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch in my living room, all the lights on. Every so often I'd look down the hallway, half expecting to see something lurking there. I kept thinking I heard faint tapping sounds or footsteps, but every time I went to check I found nothing. My nerves were shot by dawn. The next morning I had to go to work feeling like I hadn't slept at all. When I got home that evening, I forced myself to check the tree again. From my window I could see more notes pinned to the trunk. I hesitated before going outside, but curiosity got the best of me. I found 4 new pieces of paper this time, each bearing short sentences in that same imitation of my handwriting. They said, "You're not safe. I'm waiting. Keep looking, and don't shine the light." My fingers were shaky as I read them. I stuffed them in my jacket pocket and hurried back inside. I locked the door behind me and felt my heart slam in my chest. I stayed away from the window for the rest of the evening. The house felt cold, even though the thermostat showed a comfortable temperature. It was like my body was on constant high alert. I found myself jumping at ordinary sounds, like the water pipes or the creaking of the floor. I tried turning on the TV to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to that tree. I replayed the moment I saw that outline again and again, wondering what it wanted. Later that night, I considered calling the police, but what would I say? There's a figure in a tree across from my window that disappears when I shine a flashlight, and it's leaving notes in my handwriting. I didn't think that would go over well. Besides, I hadn't actually seen anyone's face. I couldn't even say for sure if it was a person, and the notes were weird, but they weren't explicitly threatening. They just gave me a feeling of deep unease. Instead, I tried to film it. I positioned my phone on a small tripod by the window, with the curtain slightly open. I left the room dark and sat on my bed watching my phone screen, which showed a live view of the tree outside. For almost 2 hours, there was nothing. No movement. No whispering. I started to feel foolish again, like I was imagining the whole thing. Right when I thought about giving up, I heard the whisper. It was so close, I flinched. On the screen, I saw the faint outline in the branches again, but only for a split second. Then it was gone. The phone didn't capture more than a blur. It was like the figure dissolved the moment it appeared. My whole body tensed. I sat there, barely breathing, feeling that same rush of panic. I checked the recording. The video only showed a dark shape flicker for less than a second. There was no clarity at all. After a few frames, it vanished. The audio was just a faint hiss. No clear voice. I ended up deleting the clip because it felt too unsettling to keep. It proved nothing anyway. I decided to close the curtains fully and try to block this thing out. But I still felt vulnerable. My instincts told me it was more than just a prank. The next few days followed the same pattern. Every night I heard a whisper calling my name. Every morning I found new notes on the tree. Sometimes they'd just say, "Watch." Other times they'd say, "Stop shining the light," or "It won't help." One day I found a note that said, "You can't run." That made my stomach clench, and I felt an urge to just drive away from here. But I couldn't leave my job. I couldn't abandon my home over something I couldn't even explain. I started sleeping on the couch, away from the window. I left every light on, and I even brought a small TV into the living room to play background noise. I told myself that if I heard the whisper, I'd ignore it. For a few nights it was quiet. No new notes appeared, and I started to relax, thinking maybe it was over. Then, on a Friday night around 2 a.m., I heard a tapping sound on the glass of my bedroom window. My blood ran cold. I was on the couch, half asleep. When I realized what it was, a wave of fear shot through me. I didn't want to move. My heart pounded so loudly I thought my neighbors could hear it. After about a minute, the tapping stopped. I lay there, sweaty, my nerves frayed. Then the whisper came again, saying my name over and over, slower each time, with this raspy breath at the end of each syllable. My eyes watered from stress, and my head started pounding. I felt my body tense up, like I was preparing to fight or run. But I did nothing. I just lay still, gripping the blanket. Eventually, I heard silence. It felt like hours before I fell asleep again. The next morning, I gathered my courage and went outside to check the tree again. There were 6 notes this time, arranged in a neat line on the trunk. Each note had only one word. Altogether, they formed a sentence. Don't pretend you don't hear me. My legs felt weak, and my hands began to tremble. I tore the notes down, stuffing them into a plastic bag. I stood there scanning the ground, looking for footprints or any sign of who was doing this. The dirt around the tree was pretty packed. I saw a few scuff marks, but nothing specific. The trunk had bits of tape stuck to it. It didn't make sense. Why would anyone go through all this trouble? Back in my condo, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at those notes in the bag. I tried to convince myself to call the police. But then I imagined the conversation again. I had no proof of anything except some scraps of paper with creepy messages. I had a blurred video clip that showed nothing. I had a story about a whisper at night. I pictured the cops rolling their eyes or telling me there was nothing they could do without a suspect. The entire situation felt hopeless. I decided to secure my window better. I went to a hardware store and bought a thicker curtain and a latch that was more secure. I installed everything that same afternoon, triple-checking that the window wouldn't open unless I unlocked it from the inside. That gave me a small bit of comfort. I also bought a larger flashlight, one of those high-powered LED ones. That night, I placed it next to the couch so I could grab it if I heard anything. Around midnight, I heard a soft, muffled sound outside. I slowly got up and tiptoed to the window, staying behind the curtain. I held my breath, lifted the edge of the curtain a fraction, and shined the flashlight. I didn't see anyone in the tree, but the beam caught a glimpse of something white near the trunk, like a piece of cloth. It moved quickly, then disappeared into the dark. My pulse hammered in my ears. I felt like I was losing my mind. I yanked the curtain shut again, stepping backward. My body started to shake, and I clenched my teeth. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, holding the flashlight in my lap. Each day since, there have been new notes on the trunk. Sometimes just one note, other times 2 or 3. They all have short sentences, repeated phrases telling me to look or listen or stop hiding. I feel run down. My appetite has gone. I catch myself checking that window every few minutes, even in broad daylight. I've grown suspicious of every little sound outside. I even asked a neighbor in the hallway if they'd seen anyone near that empty lot at night. She said no. She gave me a strange look when I insisted that someone must be climbing the tree. She said she's never noticed a single person back there. Right now, I'm sitting in my living room writing this down because I don't know what else to do. My heart races every time I think about the next whisper, the next note. I have all the scraps of paper in a box under my bed. Sometimes I open the box to compare the handwriting to mine, and I can't see any difference. It's as if I wrote them in my sleep. But I know I didn't. I hear the wind outside. It's almost midnight, and I'm dreading the sound of that whisper. My hands are cold, and my arms are covered in goosebumps. The worst part is not knowing who or what is out there. I keep thinking about that first night I saw the silhouette. It stared right at me. I felt it, even through the darkness. I just want it to go away. But every time I try to ignore it, the notes get worse and the whisper gets louder. I'm not sure how this ends. I'm too afraid to open the window at night, yet I can't stop myself from looking. That twisted tree is right there, no more than 20 feet away. I feel like the branches are reaching toward me, beckoning me to come outside. But I won't. I'll stay here with the lights on, waiting for another tap on the glass or another slip of paper stuck to the trunk. I can feel my chest tightening as I think about it. My breath is shallow. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. I keep hoping it's just a nightmare, that I'll wake up one day and see the tree standing empty with no notes pinned to it. But every morning, there's something new written in my own style, telling me to keep watching. I wish I could unsee that figure. I wish I could unhear that whisper, but I can't. It's out there right now, probably staring at my window, waiting for me to look. And I'm sure it'll call my name again tonight. All I can do is sit here, alert, my flashlight ready, the curtains drawn, praying that this stops somehow. I don't know what else to do. All I can say is, I never expected something like this in a place so quiet. Now everything feels different, and I have no idea what might happen next. I'm not the type of person who believes in strange occurrences or ghost stories. I've worked security for a while now, and I'm used to empty hallways and late-night silence. But something about this building changed my outlook. I can't ignore what I saw. I can't pretend the floors are normal. I can't forget the noises I heard. I might not have proof beyond a few footprints and some wet smears on an old floor, but I know what happened, and I need to explain it, even if nobody believes me. I started this job about 6 months ago. The building sits in the middle of downtown, surrounded by newer structures with modern lobbies and sleek security systems. But this place is ancient compared to those. The walls are solid brick underneath layers of paint. The floors are made of old tiles that are chipped in certain spots. The elevator is an iron relic that rattles and groans whenever it moves between floors. Even during the day, it's slow and unpredictable. At night, people rarely use it. By 10 p.m., most of the offices are empty. My shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my main task is to patrol each floor a couple of times throughout the night, check doors, and make sure no one's trespassing. On a typical night, I make a round every hour. I walk from the lobby to the top floor, which is the 9th floor here. Sometimes I use the stairs, and sometimes I take the old elevator if I feel lazy or if my legs are tired. That elevator always creaks, and it has a gate you pull shut before pressing the button. The caretaker told me that if I'm uncomfortable, I can just use the stairs. He knows the elevator is old, and he doesn't want me to get stuck inside it. I've told him I'm fine. I've been in worse buildings, and I don't scare easily. My first month was uneventful. I'd see the occasional stray cat in the alley outside, or maybe hear an odd noise from some old pipes. The caretaker, whose name is Roberto, told me that people claim the building is haunted. He said it with a laugh and told me not to worry, because in his opinion, there's always a rational explanation. I nodded and said I agreed. Then one night, I was on my 3rd round. It was around 2 a.m. and I'd already walked the stairs twice, so I chose the elevator. I was on the lobby floor. I slid open the metal gate, stepped inside, pulled the gate shut, and pressed 9. The motor made its usual grinding sound. The elevator shook a bit as it started moving. Nothing unusual so far. It stopped briefly at the 3rd floor with a jolt. But nobody was there, and I hadn't pressed 3. I figured it was an electrical glitch. I pressed 9 again, and the elevator continued upward. It did another short stop at floor 5, then moved on. Every time it stopped, the door stayed shut, and I just pressed 9 again until it moved. When it reached the 9th floor, the elevator jerked so hard I stumbled. I opened the gate and stepped out. The hallway was quiet. All the doors were locked. The lights were on, though a few bulbs flickered. I did a quick walkthrough, tested a couple of doors, and turned back for the elevator. At that moment, I heard a metallic click from behind me. I spun around but saw nothing. The hallway was empty, and I told myself it was the old air ducts or something simple. I got back in the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and waited. The ride down felt slower than usual. The cables were grinding overhead. The car shook like it might stop between floors. Then it did something I hadn't seen before. It went straight past the lobby. The light on the panel still said 1, but it didn't stop there. The elevator kept going down with a heavy hum, then jerked to a stop so hard I almost lost my balance again. When the door opened, it led to the basement level. I hadn't selected the basement, but there I was. The basement hallway is a small area with a single maintenance room and a boiler room. Normally, that hallway light is off at night unless the caretaker is down there. But the light was flickering. I felt a sudden chill on the back of my neck. The air smelled damp, like old concrete. I stepped out, checked around, found nothing unusual, and got back on the elevator. I pressed 1 again, and this time it took me to the lobby. After that, I told myself the elevator was just old and glitchy. The real trouble started 2 weeks later. I was on the 6th floor, checking the supply closet. It was around midnight. I heard a sudden screech from down the hallway. It sounded like something scraping metal against metal. I stepped out of the closet and listened. The hallway was empty. Then I heard the elevator motor whirring. The sound got closer, and I heard the elevator stop at the 6th floor. The gate slid open on its own. I had not called it. My heart rate picked up, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I stepped toward the elevator and looked inside. Nobody was there. The interior light was dim. I could smell dust and oil. The air felt stale. I froze for a second, uncertain whether to step in or walk away. Eventually, I decided to get in and press the lobby button, hoping it would just go down. But when I pressed the button, the elevator started moving up instead. I got tense. I pressed the lobby button again. No response. It continued upward, squeaking and rattling. I watched the floors pass. 7, 8, 9. But it didn't stop. At that point, the panel only goes up to 9. Yet the elevator kept ascending. The motor made an even louder hum. The overhead light flickered a few times. My chest felt tight. My hands were sweaty. I let go of the button and stood still. My breathing got shallow. I stared at the door, wondering if I should pry it open. But the elevator stopped on its own. The indicator light on the panel showed no floor number. I heard the gate unlock. I waited a few seconds, unsure if I should open it. Eventually, I slid the gate open. The corridor in front of me was dark. I could see a long hallway with a few light fixtures spaced out along the ceiling, but only one bulb flickered at the far end. The walls looked older than the rest of the building. The paint was peeling and the floor tiles were stained. The air felt thick. I heard a quiet dripping sound like water falling onto concrete. I couldn't smell anything particular, just a vague, damp odor. My legs felt heavy. Part of me wanted to stay inside the elevator, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I took a few steps out and looked around, shining my flashlight on the walls. There were old frames on the wall, but they were empty. The glass was cracked in a couple of them. The corridor stretched about 30 feet before turning left. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. I stepped carefully, unsure if the floor was stable. It felt solid beneath my feet. I reached the corner and aimed my flashlight around it. The hallway continued, but I saw a door on the right. It was an unmarked wooden door. I tried the handle, but it was locked. That's when I felt a sudden rush of cold air behind me, almost like someone had opened a window. I spun around, but nothing was there. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. My pulse was pounding in my ears. My stomach felt tense. I backed away from the door and hurried back to the elevator, making sure I kept my flashlight aimed forward. The hallway remained empty. As soon as I stepped back in the elevator, the gate slammed shut on its own, and the elevator dropped. I grabbed the railing and almost lost my balance. The elevator sped downward, then stopped abruptly at the 9th floor. I stumbled out, heart racing, and leaned against the wall. The corridor of the 9th floor was fully lit, just as it should be. Everything looked normal. I hurried to the stairwell and took the stairs down to the lobby. By the time I got there, I was drenched in sweat. The caretaker was there because he often stays until around 1 a.m. doing paperwork in his small office next to the lobby. I told him what I experienced. He looked skeptical. He said the elevator can't go beyond the 9th floor, and there's no 10th floor, let alone some hidden corridor. He smiled and said I must have been half asleep. I insisted I was wide awake. He told me to calm down, maybe take the stairs for the rest of the night. I nodded, but my body was still jittery. I felt a tightness in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been somewhere not on the building's official floors. I spent the rest of that shift using the stairs. I went up to the 9th floor around 3 a.m., and everything seemed normal. Then I walked down each floor, double-checking doors and windows. At the end of the shift, something else weird happened. I walked past the elevator on the lobby level to head out, and I noticed wet footprints on the floor in front of it. They were faint, but I could see the shape of shoes. The caretaker had locked up his office, so I had no one to show. I felt a wave of unease and left quickly. The next day, I came back determined to look for any sign that there might be a hidden floor. I wanted to see if there was a locked access door or something. I checked the building plans in the caretaker's office. It showed basement, lobby, floors 1 through 9, plus a small mechanical penthouse above 9. No mention of a 10th floor. I asked the caretaker if I could see the mechanical area. He shrugged and took me up. The mechanical area is just a dusty room with the elevator machinery and some maintenance tools. The caretaker was calm and said, "See? No hidden corridor." I forced a smile but stayed quiet. That night I tried to avoid the elevator. Around midnight I heard scraping noises again. I recognized them as the elevator's gate opening on a floor above me. I was on the 5th floor then. I could hear the elevator motor running. I walked to the elevator doors and listened. The sound stopped. I waited, breathing slowly, expecting the elevator to arrive. Nothing happened. I decided to open the door to the stairwell and continue my patrol, but I heard a sudden clang from behind me. I turned and saw the elevator door on the 5th floor was slightly open. Not wide, just a crack. My heart pounded. I walked over to it, pulled it open, and saw the elevator car sitting there. The gate was closed, but inside the light flickered. Something about that flicker made my throat tighten. I stepped back and let the door close. I finished my patrol, feeling uneasy. At about 2 a.m., I went back to the lobby for my short break. I sat in a chair by the main desk, sipping some water and scrolling on my phone to distract myself. After a while, I decided to check the basement. Sometimes the caretaker forgets to lock the maintenance room. I walked down the stairs to the basement. As I pushed open the door, I caught a damp smell again. I walked down the hallway. Nothing was off at first, but then I noticed footprints on the basement floor. They were wet, just like the ones I saw in the lobby before. They led to the elevator doors. The elevator was closed and silent. I placed my hand on it. The metal felt cold. I returned to the lobby and waited for my next round. This time I told myself I had to see if that strange floor would appear again. I was scared, but I wanted answers. I got in the elevator around 3:30 a.m. and pressed 9. The ride was smooth. No unexpected stops. I reached the 9th floor, walked around, and came back. Nothing special happened. I got in and pressed the lobby button. On the way down, the elevator stopped at floor 7. The door opened with a loud screech. No one was there. I hesitated but stepped out to check if anything was going on. That corridor was empty. I got back in and pressed the lobby button again. The door closed, and I felt the elevator drop for a few seconds. Then it lurched upward with a bang. I braced myself. It moved up, past 8, 9, and kept going. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt my ears pop. The overhead light flickered again. I gripped the side rail, waiting for it to stop. When it stopped, the panel was dark. I knew where I was going to be. I opened the gate, and once again that corridor stretched out in front of me. This time the corridor was slightly better lit. 2 bulbs flickered instead of just one. The door at the far end was open a crack. I shined my flashlight and saw the door leading into another room. The door hinges squeaked in the distance as if it was moving back and forth. I forced myself to walk forward. My legs were stiff. My stomach churned. When I reached that door, I pushed it gently with my foot. It swung open, revealing a small, empty office. It had a wooden desk and an old metal chair. No windows. The walls had peeling wallpaper. I scanned the room with my flashlight. There was a single file cabinet, half rusted. I tried to open the drawers, but they were locked. I heard a drip from the corner, like water coming from the ceiling. I stepped on a damp spot on the floor, and my shoe squeaked. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. The sound was so loud it made me jump. I spun around, pulled the door, and it opened easily. Nobody was there. My breath got faster. I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I hurried back to the elevator. The hallway was still empty, but I felt I was being watched. I got in, slammed the gate shut, and pressed every button. The elevator lurched downward again. I clung to the railing. After a few seconds, it stopped at floor 9. I stumbled out, opened the stairwell door, and ran all the way down to the lobby. My lungs burned from the run. When I got to the lobby, my hands shook as I tried to sign the night log. The caretaker's office was dark. He'd gone home. I sat there until my shift ended. I considered leaving early, but I needed the job. When I finally left, I noticed footprints near the elevator again, the same wet prints I'd seen before. The next morning, I confronted the caretaker. I told him everything I experienced step by step. He just shook his head and told me that the elevator cannot physically go above the 9th floor. He offered to show me all the mechanical schematics and insisted there is no 10th floor. He looked annoyed, but also concerned, as if he thought I was losing it. He reminded me that he's never heard of these hallways or that extra room. I got frustrated. I told him about the footprints. He said maybe there's a leak somewhere. I told him about the desk and the file cabinet. He just laughed. Every night since, I've seen more signs. Sometimes it's the wet footprints in the basement, or the damp spots on the 9th floor near the elevator. Other times it's the scraping sound of the elevator gate opening on a floor where no one called it. I've taken photos with my phone, but everything shows up too dark or blurry. I tried bringing the caretaker to see the footprints once, but they'd dried up by then, leaving only a faint mark. He told me I was probably tracking water from somewhere else. I've stopped sharing details with him because he's never convinced. I still work here. I still do my rounds. Every time I approach that elevator, I feel my skin prickle. Some nights, I only use the stairs. But there are times when I hear the elevator moving on its own, and curiosity gets the better of me. I'll rush to the nearest doors and see it pass by with no one inside. I'll hear the cables creak. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of something in the elevator, a shape, a blur. Then it's gone. I can't figure out what it all means. I only know I keep finding these footprints, these water stains, and hearing that steady drip whenever I'm in that hidden corridor. I'm sure it's real. My body reacts every time. My heart thuds. My hair stands on end. My mouth goes dry. I feel a sense of dread, like I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be. The caretaker keeps telling me it's impossible. But I've been there. I've seen the desk. I've felt the cold air and stepped on that damp floor. I haven't quit, though I've considered it. The job pays well enough, and jobs are hard to come by. I'm trying to hold it together, hoping that maybe one day I'll gather enough evidence to show the caretaker or someone else. Until then, I face the elevator every night. I keep my flashlight close. I check the corridors. I note every strange sound in my log, even though the caretaker never reads it. I tell myself I'm just doing my job. But deep down, I know something's off about this place. And the scariest part is that nobody believes me. That corridor isn't on any floor plan. It doesn't show up on the elevator panel. The caretaker swears it can't exist. But I go back every night, and I keep seeing footprints and wet stains. I keep hearing that drip. I keep feeling that rush of cold air, and I know I'm not imagining it. If there's anything I learned, it's that old buildings hold secrets, and this one won't let me ignore them. I never expected my life to break apart after that stupid car accident. I didn't die and nobody else got hurt, but something changed in me. My memory slips sometimes. I lose a few minutes in the middle of the day and come back feeling disoriented. It's been happening for months. At first I told myself it was stress or maybe the after effects of the impact. But these blackouts are always followed by a single image I can't explain. A long corridor with wet walls and pale hands dragging themselves across the floor. I don't know where that place is, or why I keep seeing it. It feels real, like I'm inside it. And then, when I'm awake at night, I see those same hands. They crawl out of the shadows in my bedroom. They scratch at the floor. They reach out like they want to pull me into whatever hole they came from. I haven't shown anyone these marks because by morning they disappear. I keep looking for proof, but there's never anything left. I'm starting to lose my grip. My nights feel like they blend into each other. I wake up in a sweat, breathing hard, my heart hammering. My t-shirt sticks to my chest and my pillow is damp. I stare at the walls. The edges of the room look wrong, like they're bending toward me. Sometimes I think I see a flicker of movement where the paint peels near the ceiling. Other times I hear a faint scraping, like fingernails on plaster, but nothing ever steps fully into the light, not unless I'm half asleep. Then those pale hands come out, and I freeze. I can't move. My pulse pounds in my ears and my eyes feel too dry, like they're begging me to shut them. But I can't close them. I can't look away. A quiet rasping sounds against the wall, and I see those hands. They have dirty nails, slightly curved, and they press against the surface, trying to get a grip. It looks like they're groping around for something. Then they retreat. The room goes still. I rub my eyes, and I wonder if I'm hallucinating. But then I see the floor in the morning, and there are fresh scratch marks. Faint, but they're there. I haven't told my friends. They noticed I've been weird since the accident, but none of them push me about it. They assume it's PTSD or leftover shock from that day. The fact is, I can't stand the thought of explaining what I see. It sounds too crazy. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but nightmares don't leave marks. Nightmares also don't come with the smell of damp stone, which lingers on my clothes sometimes. I'll be getting dressed for work, and I'll catch a whiff of something like a wet basement. My hands shake when I button my shirt. My reflection in the mirror looks tired, with dark circles under my eyes. I keep reliving that corridor. I started having those flashes 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital. At first, I assumed it was part of some dream. I'd be doing something normal, cleaning the kitchen or checking my phone, and suddenly my vision would go black. I'd feel a rush of cold air, and my stomach would twist. Then I'd see that corridor, narrow, with walls that glisten. Water drips down them, forming little puddles. The floor is rough concrete with cracks. The only noise I hear is the sound of hands scraping. I see them moving, slow and deliberate, like they're searching for a way out. Their skin is pale, almost translucent, and they leave trails of slimy water on the ground. My chest gets tight and I feel like I can't breathe. Then I snap back to my normal surroundings. Sometimes I'm on the couch, sometimes I'm in the bathroom. My heart races and I have to steady myself on the nearest surface. I tried to bring it up once with my doctor. She asked if I might have experienced some head trauma in the accident. I admitted my head hit the window pretty hard. She suggested I see a neurologist, so I did. The scans came back normal. They said everything looked fine, no permanent damage. I told them about the corridor. They said it might be a form of post-concussive syndrome. They thought these visions were something my brain was creating to process the accident. But that doesn't explain the scratches on my floor or the strange wet spots I sometimes find near the walls. It also doesn't explain the feeling of cold fingers brushing against my shoulder at night. I tried recording myself sleeping. I set up my phone on a shelf, pointed at the bed. The next morning, I woke up sore all over. My bed was in disarray, my covers tangled around my legs. I snatched my phone and checked the video. For a while I saw nothing. I was lying there, occasionally shifting. Then around 2:23 a.m., the screen blinked. The entire video feed distorted with static, like some interference jammed the signal. It lasted for about 6 minutes. When the picture came back, I was in bed, but my expression was different. I looked tense. I kept staring at the corner of the room, behind the camera's view. I couldn't see what I was looking at. My mouth moved, but there was no sound except for a slight crackling. I watched for another 10 minutes, but nothing else happened. I tried to check that corner later, shining a flashlight on the walls. I didn't find anything except a few light scrapes, almost like claw marks. They formed a half circle as if something had dragged its nails while sliding along the wall. I touched them, and a cold spike shot through my fingers. I yanked my hand back. It felt like an electric jolt. A few days later, I woke up on the floor by my bedroom door. My right shoulder ached and my palms were pressed against the wooden boards. I had a fleeting memory of those hands. They were pushing me, or maybe guiding me. I can't recall the details, but I remember how damp they felt, like they'd just come out of a river. When I got up, I saw fresh scratches on the door, 5 lines about a foot off the ground. The lines were long and thin, spaced like fingers. I crouched, touched them gently. I felt splinters. The paint had peeled back a little. I stayed there, breathing hard, my head pulsing with a dull pain. My mouth tasted sour. I wiped my lips with my wrist, trying to focus on the moment. I thought, this can't be real. None of this is possible. But I could see and feel the scratches. They were right there. I started leaving my lights on. I bought a nightlight for the hallway. I couldn't sleep without at least one lamp glowing, because I felt like something was always waiting in the darkness. I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I'd notice little movements in the corners of my vision. I'd hear faint dripping sounds, like water on stone. My chest would get tight again, my body would tense. My mouth would go dry. I'd try to swallow, but it felt like I had a rock in my throat. The air felt heavy, and I was sure I smelled damp earth. Sometimes I'd jump out of bed, flick the main light on, and check every inch of the room. I never found anything except that faint odor. I'd open the window to let fresh air in, but the smell seemed stuck to the walls. A few weeks ago, I tried visiting the spot where I had the car accident. It's about 20 minutes outside town, near an intersection that few people use late at night. There's a stop sign there, but I missed it. My front tire blew out when I swerved, and I ended up in a ditch. That's all. No big tragedy. My memory of that night feels incomplete, though. I stood there on the roadside looking at the ditch. The sun was up, so nothing felt spooky or weird. But as I stared, I had a brief flash of that corridor. I saw the dripping water. I heard the rasp of hands on concrete. My head spun. I took a few shaky breaths and leaned against my car. My body felt cold, even though it was warm outside. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I waited for it to pass. Eventually, the sensation faded, but I left quickly. I didn't want to linger. I felt exposed, like something was watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. At home that night, I tried to relax. I turned on the TV, hoping to drown out my thoughts. Every so often, I glanced at the shadows in the corners of the living room. I listened for that scraping sound. My muscles were tense. I tried to sip some water, but my throat felt tight. Around midnight, I forced myself to go to bed. I left the hallway light on, locked my bedroom door, and lay down with my phone next to me. I wanted to record again, but I was too tired to deal with the aftermath. I just closed my eyes. I woke up later. The first thing I felt was intense cold. My body was stiff, like I'd been lying in ice. I reached for the blanket, but it was gone. I looked around in the dim glow from the lamp. The blanket was on the floor, bunched up near the door. I heard a soft sound like a low whisper coming from the corner by the closet. I couldn't make out any words, just a quiet hiss. My pulse sped up. I sat up, my back against the headboard, trying to see if anything was there. Then I noticed movement near the closet door. Pale hands slid out from behind it, gripping the frame. They pulled at it, and the door creaked. I heard the nails scrape against the wood, making a sharp, sickening noise. I wanted to jump up and run, but my legs felt like they were filled with cement. My breathing got fast and shallow. My heart pounded so hard it made my chest hurt. The hands crept farther in, and I saw slim wrists, then forearms. They looked thin and clammy, with water dripping off them. Drops fell to the floor, leaving small puddles. Then I heard the same whisper again, but it was a little louder. It felt like they were trying to say something. I just couldn't understand it. My ears rang. I forced myself to move. I reached over to the lamp. My hand shook. I flicked the lamp off, then on, hoping it would startle whatever that was. The movement in the corner paused. The hands stopped. They slowly slipped back behind the door frame, disappearing into darkness. I sat there, staring. For a moment, I was sure they were gone. Then I heard the murmur again, right next to my bed. It sounded like it was inches from my face. My skin crawled. I jolted back, reaching for the lamp switch again, flicking it on and off in a panic. The light flickered, but nothing else showed up. The whisper stopped. I stayed up, hugging my knees to my chest, waiting for something else to happen. Eventually, the sun came up. I got out of bed on shaky legs, and the first thing I did was check the closet door. There were fresh scratches there, deep grooves in the wood. A few droplets of water still clung to the surface. I ran my finger over one. It felt cold. My stomach twisted. I grabbed a towel and tried to wipe it up, but the moisture remained. I threw the towel aside and just stared at the marks. I felt numb. By this point, I'm operating on raw nerves. I don't go out unless I need to. I keep checking the walls, the corners, the floor. I can't keep calm. My hands tremble when I hold a cup of coffee. I see flickers in my peripheral vision all the time. A few days ago, I blacked out in the living room. I was standing by the window, then everything vanished. I came to in the corridor again. I was standing there, surrounded by dripping walls. The floor felt cold beneath my feet. Pale hands were scattered around me. They dragged along the concrete, making that slow, scratching noise. There was an overhead light that flickered, but I couldn't see its source. It was a dull glow, enough to see the wet walls, but not enough to see any exits. I felt water running down my arm. I looked at it, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. My entire arm was damp. I tried to move, but my feet seemed stuck. I heard the hands whispering again. I can't describe the sound in any fancy way. It was just low and broken, like someone gasping out half-formed words. I turned around in a circle, looking for a door or a window. There was nothing. I panicked. My heart raced. My breath came out in ragged bursts. Then something brushed against my ankle. I jolted. One of the hands had reached out, closing around my leg. The touch was cold. I let out a short, sharp yell. Then I felt a pull on my mind, like I was yanked backward. And I was back in my living room on my knees. The TV was off. The clock read 3:14 p.m. I had lost 10 minutes. Now I'm scared to sleep. I don't want to open my eyes and see those hands creeping out of the walls. I'm also terrified of blacking out during the day. My head hurts all the time. My neck muscles are stiff. I keep the TV on, the lights on, everything on, but it doesn't help. The corridor exists somewhere, and it's linked to me. Every time I fade out, I end up there. Every time I wake up at night, I see pieces of it in my room. Scratches appear on the floor, on the door, on the walls. Wet footprints come and go. I hear those whispers. They try to say something. I just don't know what it is. I've thought about moving out of my apartment, but I'm afraid it won't matter. Whatever is happening is following me. I've tried cleaning up the scratch marks, painting over them, but they come back. It's like they're renewing themselves each time those hands show up. No one else sees them. I tried taking a picture once. The photo was just a blank shot of the floor, no scratches. But when I look with my own eyes, the marks are there. It's enough to make me doubt my own sanity. I can't explain it and I can't prove it. But it's real to me. I feel every single scratch. I hear every whisper. The corridor is always waiting somewhere behind my eyes, waiting for me to blink or drift off for a second. And those pale hands are always ready to crawl out of my walls when I try to rest. This is my life now. I can't shake it off, and I don't know how to stop it. I'm just holding on, hoping that maybe one day I'll open my eyes and the corridor won't be there anymore. But every night, I still see those wet, pale fingers pressing into my bedroom wall, leaving deep grooves in the paint. And I still wake up with my chest pounding, unable to catch my breath, knowing I'll find fresh scratch marks in the morning. I never asked for late-night noises. I never thought I'd feel weird about an empty apartment next door. But I've been hearing things that don't make sense, and I can't ignore it anymore. I live alone, minding my own business in a small condo. I usually come home, cook dinner, watch something on TV, and go to bed. It's quiet here. At least it used to be. Now there's this low scraping sound at night. Sometimes it sounds like furniture being dragged across the floor. Other times it's a muffled laugh or a single note from a piano that's out of tune. The apartment next to mine is supposed to be empty. I know this because the building manager said nobody has been there for months. But if nobody's in there, why do I keep hearing these sounds? I'll start from the beginning. About 4 months ago, the neighbor moved out. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself, never caused problems. One day, he posted a sign on his door saying he was leaving for a new job in another state. A moving truck came, took his stuff, and that was it. The apartment was officially vacant. I sometimes saw the building manager show it to prospective renters, but no one ever moved in. It's been empty since then, or at least that's what everyone says. The noises began 3 weeks ago. I was up late because I had trouble sleeping. It was around midnight. I was lying in bed flipping through channels on my TV, trying to distract myself until I got sleepy. Suddenly, I heard this scraping noise coming from the wall behind my bed. It sounded like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I thought maybe the manager was letting some contractor in at odd hours to do repairs, but the noise went on for a while, then stopped. I turned off the TV to listen. The scraping sound returned, a bit louder this time with a few pauses between each dragging movement. Then it stopped again. I shrugged and tried to ignore it. The next night, I was reading a newspaper in the living room around 11 when I heard a short series of piano notes. They were out of tune, like somebody messing with an old instrument that hadn't been tuned in years. It lasted for maybe 30 seconds, then went silent. I put the paper down and waited. Nothing else happened. I remember feeling a little confused, but I told myself it was probably a TV from another unit. Sound travels in weird ways in this building. I decided to go to bed. A few nights later, I heard laughter. It was low and muffled. At first, I thought it might be the TV in the apartment above mine. Then I realized it was coming through the wall I share with the empty unit. It wasn't a loud laugh. It sounded like someone holding back giggles. I checked the time. It was past midnight. It went on for about a minute, then stopped. I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it. I told myself maybe the unit wasn't empty. Maybe someone had moved in without me noticing. But that seemed unlikely because I usually see the manager if there's a new tenant. After a few days of these random sounds, I decided to talk to the building manager. I caught him in the hallway one morning while he was fiddling with a light fixture. I asked him if someone had moved into apartment 304, the unit next to mine. He said no. He told me the place was still vacant, and no one had the key except for him and the owner. I asked if he was sure. He nodded, looking a bit annoyed. I let it go, but I walked away feeling uneasy. That night, around midnight again, the noises got louder. This time I heard the scraping, then what sounded like a chair slamming against a wall. The hair on my arm stood up and my heart started racing. I muted my TV and pressed my ear against the wall. There was heavy breathing, or maybe the sound of something shifting around. It was quiet but distinct. I went to my front door, stepped into the hallway, and walked over to the apartment next door. I knocked, my hand trembling a bit. The second my knuckles touched the door, all sounds stopped. I waited. Nothing. The door didn't open. There were no footsteps. Just silence. After a minute, I knocked again. Still nothing. I felt stupid, standing there in my pajamas, so I went back inside. The next morning, I walked out to my balcony to water my plants. I saw something that made me step back. There were playing cards scattered on the floor of my balcony, maybe 5 or 6. They were arranged in a pattern that looked like some kind of symbol. The cards were face up, each from a different suit. I saw hearts, clubs, spades, and diamonds. The arrangement wasn't random. It formed an odd shape, almost like a circle with a line through it. My skin started to crawl. I picked them up quickly and tossed them into the trash. My hands felt shaky. It was like somebody had left me a message I didn't understand. I checked my door and windows to make sure they were locked. They were. The balcony is high up, so nobody could have climbed up easily. I tried to reason it out. Maybe the wind had blown them from somewhere else. But the shape they formed seemed too deliberate. I couldn't focus at work that day. I was on edge, checking my phone, wondering if I'd find more cards when I got home. That night I stood outside on my balcony for a while, looking at the empty windows next door. The curtains were drawn. No lights were on inside. I went back in and sat on my couch, leaving the TV off. I wanted to hear if anything happened. Around 11:30, I heard that piano again. It was the same out-of-tune notes, repeated a few times. My heart thumped against my chest. I grabbed my cell phone and recorded the sound through the wall. After a few seconds, the piano stopped, and I heard that quiet laughter again. My hand was shaking so much that I almost dropped my phone. I rushed into the hallway. I knocked on the neighbor's door. Again, total silence. I tried the doorknob. It was locked. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. The hallway lights hummed. My throat felt dry. I went back to my unit and locked myself in. I checked every room, even though I knew nobody was there. I ended up sleeping on the couch, but I didn't really sleep. I just dozed off here and there, jumping at every small sound. The next morning I was hesitant to go to my balcony, but I forced myself. I swung the sliding door open, and I felt a jolt of fear. More playing cards were spread out on the balcony floor, forming another strange shape. This time it looked like two triangles overlapping. The cards were from different suits again, but I didn't take time to identify them. I brushed them into a plastic bag. I stood there looking at the neighboring balcony. No sign of movement. I felt lightheaded. My stomach churned. My heart was pounding. I had no idea who was doing this or why. I decided I needed proof. That night, I set up my phone near the wall between our apartments to record the sounds while I tried to sleep. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to a crashing noise from next door. It was so loud that my windows rattled. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering, and ran to the living room. The noise sounded like a table being flipped. I heard more laughter, louder this time, and the same out-of-tune piano notes. They went on for about a minute. Then, absolute quiet. I checked my phone to see if it had recorded anything. It showed a 30-second clip of banging sounds, and then the audio cut off. The app had crashed. My phone's battery indicator said it was at 50%, so it wasn't a dead battery. It just froze at the exact moment the noises got intense. In the morning, I found even more cards on the balcony. Now there were about a dozen. They formed a shape that looked like letters, maybe a warning. I felt sweat on my forehead. My hands were shaking. I wondered if I should call the police, but I didn't have any real evidence except strange recordings that kept failing. Also, I'd have to explain to them that the place was empty. I didn't think they'd do much. I tried talking to the building manager again. I showed him the plastic bag full of playing cards. I told him about the noises. He looked confused and a bit alarmed. He said he'd come check the apartment with me right away. We grabbed his keys and went up to 304. He unlocked the door and we stepped inside. It was empty. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. The place was completely bare. He let me walk around. I looked into the bedroom, the bathroom, the living room. There was no piano, no chairs, no table. I noticed dust on the floor. No footprints. There weren't any signs that someone had been inside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in there, even if I couldn't see anyone. The manager asked if I was okay. I said no, I wasn't. I told him I heard furniture being dragged and a piano. He looked around, saw no reason for these noises, and gave me this uneasy shrug. He said he'd change the locks just in case. Then he locked the door, and we left. That was 2 days ago. Yesterday I came home from work and went straight to the balcony. I saw a single playing card lying in the center of the floor. It was the Joker. It was the only card there. I felt a chill run through my whole body. My eyes burned and my stomach twisted. I picked it up and flipped it over. Nothing on the back besides the normal pattern. I looked over at the next balcony. The curtains in 304 were still closed, but I swear I saw them move just a little, as if someone tugged at the edge. Last night I barely slept. I kept all the lights on, just sitting on the couch, my phone in my hand. I kept checking the time, waiting for the scraping or the piano. Around midnight I heard a single key press on what sounded like the piano. That single note echoed through the wall. My hand started sweating. I stood up and walked to the door, but I didn't open it this time. I was too freaked out to face that silence again. The single piano note repeated twice more. Then nothing. No laughter, no dragging, just silence. I didn't get any more cards that night, at least not that I saw. This morning, I checked the balcony as soon as I woke up. No new cards. I stepped out there to feel the cold morning air and to see if maybe someone had placed something during the night. Nothing. I reached for my phone to text a friend about what's been going on, but then I realized how crazy I'd sound. I keep hearing furniture moving and a creepy piano next door in an apartment that's empty. Also, I keep finding playing cards on my balcony. That doesn't sound rational, and I like to rationalize everything, but I can't explain this. I'm at home now, telling you this story as directly as I can, trying to keep my nerves steady. It's late. The lights are off. I have my phone recording, hoping to catch these noises. I don't know who is playing that piano, and I don't know how these cards keep appearing on my balcony. I'm scared to sleep, but I'm more scared of just sitting here, waiting for the next strange sound. My ears are perked, every muscle tensed, waiting for that first scrape or that first twisted piano note. I can feel my heart beating in my chest. My thoughts keep racing back to the bare apartment and the laughter. There's no reason for any of this, yet it's happening. Part of me wants to leave this condo, but that feels extreme, and I'm not sure if the problem would even follow me somewhere else. Another part of me wants to break down that door to 304, rip out the walls, and find whatever is causing this. But that's trespassing and probably dangerous, assuming there's an actual person there. If it's not a person, then I don't know what else to do. For now, I'm just sitting here, telling you everything, trying to keep my voice low so I can hear if something starts moving next door. I'm trying not to stare at the wall, but I can't look away for long. I feel this tension in my neck and shoulders. My head hurts from lack of sleep. My stomach is tied in knots. I keep glancing at my balcony door to make sure no new cards appear out of nowhere. I have no answers. The apartment next door should be empty, but every night something in there is moving, laughing, and playing that damn piano. Whenever I knock, it stops like it's taunting me. And those playing cards, why are they arranged in those patterns? Why do they always show up on my balcony when it's locked and secured? I don't know what's next. All I can do is listen and wait. My plan is to keep recording and see if I can catch enough evidence to show the manager or the police. I'm not sure what they'll do, but I have to try. I'm tired of feeling like I'm losing my mind. If I find more cards tomorrow, maybe I'll go straight to the station and file a report. I'm just not sure how to explain it in a way that makes sense. Anyway, that's all I can say right now. I keep thinking I hear something, but it might just be my imagination. This is my life these days. Me, alone in my condo, listening for furniture that's not supposed to be there, hearing a piano that shouldn't exist, and finding messages made of playing cards. I'm telling you this because I need someone to know it's happening. I need to remind myself I'm not imagining it. There's something going on in apartment 304, and I can't escape it. I'm hoping it'll stop, but I don't really believe that anymore. All I can do is wait for the next sound and try not to lose my grip. I never expected to find anything unusual in that attic. I'm just a guy who cleans and checks the rooms after hours, and I don't go looking for trouble. I don't spend my free time exploring forbidden corners. But from the moment I first heard those heavy footsteps overhead, something in me couldn't let it go. I tried ignoring the noise. I told myself the wind or the old boards were the cause. Yet every night I heard the same thumping and dragging sounds right above my head. Eventually, I decided to see for myself what was going on. I've been working at this mansion for almost a year. It's a big place, over 100 years old, and people visit during the day to admire the architecture and old furnishings. My job is to keep the floors polished, the windows clean, and the ropes and signs in good shape. There's a neat route for the tours, from the foyer to the main hall, then the sitting rooms, dining area, upstairs bedrooms, and finally the library. It's a long walk, and usually the visitors get tired by the end of it. The attic is off limits because the owners say it's unsafe. Loose floorboards, weak beams, possible termite damage. There's always a new reason not to allow anybody up there. Nobody ever complained about the attic until I heard those noises at night. Most people probably don't notice anything, or they just assume the sounds are normal in an old mansion. But I'm the one who stays late, shutting off lights and locking doors. I'm the one who walks alone through dim hallways, carrying a flashlight and a ring of keys. After a few weeks of those noises, pacing sounds, sudden knocks, I had enough. I wanted to know if some intruder was sneaking around up there. Maybe a homeless person got in, or an animal was stuck. I tried telling myself it was nothing serious, but it kept bothering me. One evening after closing, I set out with my flashlight and a sense of determination. I told myself I was just going to check the attic door and see if it was locked. I took the stairs at the back of the mansion, the ones that staff use to carry supplies around. Those steps are narrower and creak more than the main staircase. There's a single light bulb overhead, and it flickers whenever I pass underneath. When I reached the attic door, I felt a rush of cold air that smelled like old paper and dust. The door was locked, but I heard a thump above me. It was loud. I felt it through the floorboards. It made my stomach clench. I decided I had to open that door. I used the master key. The lock turned with a grind. My heart was pounding. I've opened plenty of locked doors around here, but this one felt different. I pushed the door open, shining my flashlight ahead. The first thing I noticed was the narrow wooden stairs leading up to the attic space. They were dusty and showed signs of wear, but they looked stable enough to hold my weight. I took a step, then another. The boards creaked under me, and the air got heavier. It felt like I was walking into a sealed box. The smell of stale air got stronger, making my nose itch. At the top of the stairs, I reached a small platform. My flashlight beam showed old furniture covered with sheets and stacks of boxes. There were no windows, only small vents near the eaves. Everything was shadowy and layered with dust. I stood still for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no knocks. It was silent. The only sound was my breathing. But I felt uneasy, like I was being watched. I swept the flashlight left and right. I didn't see anything. I thought maybe the wind was rattling something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I started moving around carefully, checking the corners. My feet made little puffs of dust. I saw old suitcases, framed paintings leaning against the walls, and a broken rocking chair. I found a couple of old trunks full of linen. Everything was quiet. I convinced myself I'd been imagining things. I turned around to head back, but then I noticed a door at the far end. I hadn't seen it before because a tall shelf had been blocking my view. The door looked old, but not the same way as the rest of the attic. Its wood looked slightly newer, and it had a handle that didn't match the rest of the hardware in the mansion. I walked toward it. My flashlight flickered again. The door was shut, but it had no lock. I opened it slowly, expecting another small storage space. Instead, I saw a long hallway that stretched out much farther than the attic should allow. The walls in that hallway looked different. The paint was cracked like it belonged to some older part of the house, yet I knew there was no extension up here. I took a few cautious steps inside. My shoes touched soft dust, and the air felt stale. I aimed my flashlight along the corridor. There were more doors on both sides, each identical. Same wooden paneling, same handle, same hinges. I felt my heartbeat speeding up. This made no sense. The attic wasn't that big. There was no mention of an extended corridor in any plan I'd seen. I walked forward, trying to keep track of my path. I looked behind me and saw the attic space through the open door. It was still there, but it felt farther away now. I could see the dusty chairs and trunks, and I told myself I could turn around at any moment. But I couldn't help moving forward. I was too curious, even though my throat felt tight and I felt beads of sweat forming on my forehead. The first door on the left had a dull metal knob. I reached out and turned it. The door opened with a slow creak. I looked inside. It was an attic room that looked almost like the one I had just left, but there were small differences. There was a table on the right side that I didn't remember seeing in the main attic. There was a single window at the far end, but in the normal attic there were no real windows. I stepped in, shining my flashlight around. Dust swirled in the air. I noticed the same musty smell. It felt thicker here, like it pressed against my face. Then I heard a shuffle, like a foot dragging across the floor. I spun around, but I couldn't see anything moving. My flashlight caught shapes under sheets and old wooden boxes piled in a corner. My breath got shallow. I wanted to leave. I turned back toward the corridor door, but I found myself staring at another corridor, not the one I came through. It looked identical, but the angle was different. I froze. My chest tightened. I had just come through that door, yet now the door led to a slightly off-center hallway. I wondered if I'd gotten turned around somehow. I took a step back and bumped into a tall box that almost toppled over. The noise sent an echo through the space, and I heard another thump from somewhere deeper in the attic. I felt my pulse in my neck. I forced myself to move toward the corridor. When I stepped through the doorway, I was in another hallway with repeating doors. It looked almost the same, but I could tell the walls were a different color. They were a shade darker. I noticed the floorboards squeaked with a slightly higher pitch, like they were made of a different kind of wood. I walked down this corridor, my flashlight trembling in my hand. My grip on the handle was tight enough to hurt. I counted the doors I passed. They all looked exactly alike, with the same black knobs. I tried one at random. It was stuck. I turned the knob harder, and the door popped open with a jolt, almost throwing me off balance. I staggered into another attic space that had old curtains strung along the walls. There was a pile of dusty rugs in the middle of the floor and a single overhead lamp. It flickered weakly when I aimed the flashlight at it, as if it were still connected to some power source. The entire room smelled of stale perfume. I started feeling lightheaded. I took a few deep breaths, trying to stay calm. There were no windows here. Then I heard a scraping sound, like nails on wood, coming from behind a tall partition in the corner. My stomach lurched. I wanted to scream out, but I didn't know what I would say. My mouth felt dry. I took one shaky step in that direction, but I stopped. My instincts told me not to go any closer. I backed away inch by inch, then turned around. The door I'd come through stood half open. I hurried toward it, not wanting to stay in that room. But when I crossed the threshold, I found myself in yet another corridor. I looked around, and I couldn't see the main attic anymore. I muttered a few curses under my breath, angry at myself for coming this far. I wiped sweat from my brow. My shirt clung to my back. I could feel my knees trembling. I started moving again, desperate to find my way out. I opened doors one by one. Each door led me into a slightly different attic. Some had old books. Some had chairs stacked in corners. Some had wardrobes pushed against the walls. They all smelled like dust and mold, and they all felt deserted but not quite empty. Every time I stepped into another version of the attic, I had this sense of being observed. I never saw anyone. I never heard a voice. But I felt watched, like an invisible presence lingered at the edges of my vision. I'd spin around, shining my flashlight in every direction, but I only saw piles of objects, beams, and dusty floors. I kept thinking I might see a silhouette or a shape dart behind a box, but there was nothing there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. At one point, I found a door that looked older than the others. Its paint was flaking, and the knob had a decorative design that looked out of place. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I put my shoulder into it, and it shifted a little, so I pushed harder. It opened with a loud crack, sending dust into the air. My heart was racing. I coughed a few times and stepped through. This new space had a single overhead beam in the center, and a small wooden table under it. On the table, I saw an oil lamp. It was lit, even though it shouldn't have been. The flame was steady, giving off a faint glow that made my flashlight seem weaker. I looked at the lamp, my mind racing. Who lit it? Where did they go? I tried to calm myself, but my breathing was rapid. I reached out and touched the lamp. The metal was warm. I tugged the chain to see if it was attached to anything, but it was just an old lamp. I considered blowing it out, but something in me said no. I left it burning and looked around. The floor had scratches on it as if heavy furniture had been dragged across at some point. The walls had old floral wallpaper that peeled in places. As I moved around, I saw a large trunk in the corner. I lifted the lid, shining my flashlight inside. It was empty. I shut it and decided I needed to find a way back now. I returned to the door I had come through, thinking it would still lead me to the corridor. Instead, I walked straight into another attic room that looked almost identical, but the table was on the opposite side and there was no lamp. The sense of being watched was stronger here. My scalp tingled, and the hair on my arms stood up. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and started walking faster. I found another door along the left wall. It squeaked loudly when I opened it. I didn't care anymore. I just needed to escape. That door took me back into a long corridor with identical doors. I recognized the layout, but something was off. The corridor seemed narrower, and the overhead light was dimmer. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling for any signs of a hidden panel or a trap door. The wood felt rough and splinters stuck to my fingers. I cursed under my breath and kept going. I opened door after door, searching for the original attic space with the stairs that led down. Each time I entered a new section, I noticed small changes. A stack of crates in one corner, a missing piece of furniture, or a different pattern on the floor. Sometimes the corridor floor dipped slightly, as if the house was settling in a strange way. Other times the beams overhead creaked or popped as if they were about to snap. I felt trapped in a labyrinth that kept shifting. My throat was dry and my palms were slick with sweat. My shoulders were tense. I heard rustling behind me every now and then, like something was following. Each time I turned around quickly, shining the flashlight. I never saw anything, but I heard faint scraping sounds, as if something was dragging a leg or a piece of metal along the floor. My chest felt tight. I told myself to stay calm, to keep going. After what felt like hours, I opened another door and saw a flicker of light at the far end of the attic space. I recognized the broken rocking chair and the shelf pushed against the wall. Relief flooded through me. I hurried toward the stairwell. The door to the main attic landing was there, half open. I saw the top of the stairs that led back down to the hallway. I could feel fresh air coming from that direction. I reached the stairs and exhaled in relief. My heart was still racing, but I felt a sense of safety. Then I heard one last heavy footstep from behind me, followed by a faint knock against the floorboards. My stomach clenched. I didn't turn around. I just ran down the stairs, nearly slipping on the third step. When I reached the hallway, I slammed the attic door behind me. I locked it and stood there, panting. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my flashlight. The corridor light outside the attic seemed bright compared to the dimness inside. I felt a cool draft that made me shiver. I stood still for a few moments, trying to steady my breathing. I walked away from the attic, making sure every door in the hallway was locked. I went back to my small office near the main kitchen and sat down. My legs felt like they might give out. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of dust. I kept thinking about the repeating doors and the strange rooms. I realized there was no simple explanation. The corridors shouldn't have existed, and those extra attic rooms made no logical sense. I thought about that feeling of being watched and how I never actually saw anything. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I stayed in my office until my shift ended. I didn't go home right away. I just sat there, staring at the walls, replaying everything in my mind. The next day, I tried to act normal. I did my rounds, opened the mansion for tours, and pretended nothing happened. But I can't shake this tension in my stomach whenever I pass by that attic door. At night, I still hear the same footsteps. Sometimes they're louder, sometimes they're softer, but they're always there. And I know that if I open that door again, I'll find those corridors waiting for me. I can't explain it, and I don't think I want to anymore. The memory of stepping into those endless halls with their repetitive doors is enough to make my hands tremble even now. And I swear, whenever I'm alone in the mansion, I feel something behind me, watching. I haven't gone back. I can't forget, but I also can't bring myself to set foot in that attic again. I don't know what I'd find if I tried. I still remember the stale air hitting my face the first time I set foot in this house. It smelled like someone hadn't opened a window in years. The realtor said the previous owner moved out in a rush. She didn't offer any more details, and I didn't ask. I was too excited about the basement. It's huge and has these sturdy walls that I figured would be perfect for a workshop. I planned to install big wooden tables, metal shelves, and enough tools to work on any project that popped into my head. But the minute I walked down the creaky stairs, I felt a heavy vibe. The air was damp, and there was this faint odor of mold that clung to my nostrils. I kept telling myself it was just a musty basement, nothing more. Over time, I realized that something else was going on, something I can't explain. I want to start from the beginning. I'm a pretty simple guy. I like to fix things, I like my privacy, and I like the peace of mind that comes from having a workshop. When I opened the door to the basement on my first day here, I was already imagining how I'd arrange the tools. But something distracted me. There were these wooden shelves built into the concrete walls. Each shelf was packed with old boxes. Some were falling apart at the seams, others looked like they were taped shut by someone who really didn't want them opened. I could smell the dust even before I got close. The corners of the boxes had thick spider webs, and when I swiped at them, I felt the sticky threads clinging to my fingers. I pulled one box off the shelf and noticed the handwriting on top. It was faded, scribbled in black marker, and I couldn't read the words. I set the box on the floor, crouched down, and opened it. Inside, I found clothing that looked old, but in decent shape. Jackets, a couple of shirts, and a pair of pants. They looked familiar for some reason. When I held up one of the shirts, I saw that it had a small tear on the sleeve in the exact spot I have on my favorite work shirt. That was strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Then I found a stack of photographs at the bottom of the box. They weren't in an album or anything, just loose prints. They had that yellowish tint that old pictures get when they've been left out in the open for too long. The first few showed a house that kind of looked like mine, but it wasn't easy to tell. The lighting was off, or maybe they were taken decades ago. But then I saw a face. It was a man standing on the porch of what looked like my front porch. He had the same hairstyle as me, same color, same length, same receding pattern at the temples. He was wearing clothes that seemed about my size. At first, I thought it was just someone who happened to look like me. But as I flipped through more pictures, I felt a tightness in my chest. The resemblance was insane. The shape of his nose, the narrow set of his eyes, the stubble on his chin. Everything looked like a carbon copy of my reflection in the mirror. I stood there for a while, breathing shallow, wondering if maybe the previous owner had some weird hobby, like collecting random photos of people who looked like the next buyer or something. It sounded crazy, but I couldn't think of a better explanation. I decided to move on and opened another box. This one had random objects, a keychain with a small flashlight, an old set of house keys that looked rusted, and a wallet with nothing inside. The wallet had wear marks in the same places where my own wallet has them. There was a pack of gum, unopened, with an expiration date from a couple of years ago. Everything felt too familiar. I went through a few more boxes, finding similar stuff. Shoes that fit me, gloves that slid onto my hands without any space to spare, even a beat-up baseball cap that hugged my head as if it were mine. No name tags, no IDs, nothing that pointed to a person's identity. Only items that matched my exact measurements and style. My stomach was clenched the whole time. The basement smelled even more stale than before, like the air was getting heavier with each box I opened. After a couple of hours, I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved the boxes back onto the shelf and went upstairs. The rest of the night, I tried to focus on unpacking my own stuff in the living room. I tried to watch some TV, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept replaying the images of that man in the photos. The same eyes, the same posture. I felt like I was looking at pictures of myself, but I had never owned those clothes or stood on that porch for a photo. When I finally went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, thinking I heard noises coming from below the floor. It could have been the old pipes or the wind. But a couple of times I swore I heard a faint scratching, like nails dragging across a wooden surface. By morning, I was half delirious from lack of rest. The next day, I tried to ignore the basement. I busied myself with painting one of the upstairs rooms. I told myself I'd go down later to start cleaning out the space for my workshop, but the day got away from me, and I ended up leaving it for the next day. That night, I heard the scratching again. This time, it sounded like it was right at the door that leads down to the basement. I froze in the hallway. My pulse started pounding in my ears. I walked over to the door and stood there, listening. Something was definitely rubbing or scraping against the other side. I put my hand on the doorknob but couldn't bring myself to open it. My palm was sweaty, and my breath felt caught in my throat. The scraping stopped. I waited a few more seconds, but I didn't hear anything else. I turned away and went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep until well after midnight. The following morning, I decided I needed to do something about this. I bought some cleaning supplies, a new lock for the basement door, and a couple of strong flashlights. I opened the door in broad daylight, hoping that would make me feel less uneasy. I went down the stairs with a firm grip on the railing. The basement looked the same as before, but the smell seemed stronger. I flashed my light around and checked each corner. I didn't see rats or any obvious rodents. The boxes were all there, unchanged. I walked to the far end where there was a small door that led to an unused storage section. I opened it up, shining my flashlight inside. It was empty except for a few cobwebs. I cleared everything out, wiped the shelves, and swept the floor. It took a few hours, and by the end, my arms were sore from scrubbing. I rearranged the remaining boxes against one wall and decided I would eventually throw them out. On my way upstairs, I noticed fresh scratches on the inside of the basement door. 3 or 4 deep gouges, maybe a couple of inches long each. I pressed my fingers against them and felt the raw wood. It didn't look like an old defect. It was new. I swallowed hard and went back to the living room. I installed the new lock, a heavy-duty deadbolt, and tested it a few times. Satisfied, I told myself that would be the end of it. That night, I fell asleep on the couch while watching TV. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the basement door rattling. It wasn't a gentle rattle from a draft. It sounded like someone was trying to open it from the other side. I sat up, heart pounding. The rattle came in short bursts like someone was testing the lock. Then I heard breathing. Deep, labored inhalations, as if whoever was on the other side had just run a marathon. My chest felt tight. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or maybe the old house settling, but I knew that wasn't true. I stood up, took a few steps toward the door, and then it stopped. I stood there, my hand hovering near the doorknob, not sure what to do. Then the overhead light in the hallway started flickering. It wasn't a slow flicker, it was fast on and off like a strobe light. My eyes struggled to adjust. I flipped the switch, but it kept flickering. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something on the floor. I pointed my phone's flashlight at it. Footprints, wet footprints, as if someone had stepped in water or mud. They led from the basement door toward the center of the hallway. I crouched down and put my hand near one. It was the exact size as my own foot. The shape of the toes, the width at the ball of the foot, everything matched. I followed the footprints a few steps, but they just stopped in the middle of the hallway. There was no exit point, no trail leading away. I checked the door locks to see if someone had broken in. Everything was still bolted. I went to the windows, checked them too. Closed, locked, no signs of forced entry. I felt a chill run through me. The hair on my arm stood up. My stomach twisted. The next few nights were the same story. Scratching, rattling, heavy breathing on the other side of the basement door. Sometimes I'd get out of bed to find the lights flickering in the kitchen or living room. The footprints appeared more than once, always identical to mine, always starting near the basement door and ending somewhere random on the first floor. Each time they vanished without a trace. I started losing track of time. My hands shook in the mornings from anxiety. I drank coffee to keep myself alert, but I was still exhausted by afternoon. I stopped going down to the basement. I avoided it completely. About a week after moving in, I decided enough was enough. I had to face it. I waited until morning. I wore boots, thick gloves, and I took my heaviest flashlight as a weapon. I opened the basement door and went down the steps. The air smelled worse than ever. My nose burned and I had to breathe through my mouth. I flicked on the overhead light, but it was dim and flickered a bit. The shelves stood along the walls, and the boxes loomed like silent watchers. I walked around, checking every corner. I reached the spot with the new scratches on the door. Something caught my eye near one of the shelves. There was a trail of dust disturbed on the floor, leading behind the furnace. I moved the old furnace panel aside. Behind it was a small crawl space that I hadn't seen before. My heart thumped in my ears as I got on my hands and knees and peered inside. The flashlight beam revealed a tight passage. The walls were rough concrete. It smelled damp and foul. I inched forward. The crawl space opened up into a tiny chamber. The ceiling was low, and I had to hunch over. I saw more boxes stacked against the walls. These were older, with rotted cardboard sides. But what made me stop cold was the collection of photographs pinned to the concrete with nails. They were all of me, or rather the man who looked like me. Some pictures were the same I'd seen in the box before, but others were new to me. They showed the man standing in what looked like my new living room, my kitchen, even leaning against my car in the driveway. A wave of nausea hit me. My breathing grew shallow. I shined the light around, my throat so tight I could barely swallow. There were clothes on the ground folded in a neat stack. Next to them, a row of shoes that all matched my size. I spotted a small mirror propped against the wall, and I recognized my reflection. My face looked pale, eyes wide. I felt sweat trickle down the back of my neck. I wanted to run, but my legs felt weak. Then I heard it, a whisper or a breath behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight back at the narrow entrance. I saw nothing, but I heard the shuffle of feet on concrete. My knees trembled and my pulse drummed in my ears. I stumbled forward, crawling out of that cramped area. As soon as I reached the main part of the basement, I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the stairs. I didn't look back until I slammed the basement door shut behind me. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to lock the deadbolt. I leaned against the door, listening for any movement. There was nothing but the pounding of my own heart. I stayed awake in the living room for the rest of the day, trying to figure out what to do. Calling the police crossed my mind. But what would I say? That there's someone in my basement who looks like me? Or that there are pictures of me from before I even moved in? They'd think I was out of my mind. I decided to board up the basement door. I went to the garage, grabbed some plywood and nails, and hammered it over the doorway. I don't know if that'll stop whatever's down there, but I have to try. It's been a few hours since I sealed it shut. So far, I haven't heard any scratching or breathing, but I'm on edge. My throat is dry, and my palms keep sweating. Every sound in the house makes me jump. The footsteps in the hallway, the flickering lights, the musty smell of the basement. They all swirl in my mind like a bad dream. I keep expecting to see those wet footprints again, or to hear that heavy breathing right behind me. Part of me wants to run out of here and never look back, but I can't just abandon the house I invested in. I need to figure out who or what is down there, and why everything seems tied to me. I'm writing this down because I need to keep my thoughts straight. I'm not looking for meaning or an explanation. I just want to record exactly what's happening so I don't start questioning my own memory. If I hear the scratching again, or if I see those footprints, I'll know it's not my imagination. If I find more pictures that show me in places I've never been, I'll have proof for myself that something is really happening. The sun is starting to set. The house is quiet. The plywood is still in place over the basement door. and I keep glancing at it. My stomach is tight and my neck is stiff from tension. I haven't eaten all day, but I don't feel hungry. I'm too wound up. I'm not sure what the night will bring, but I'm bracing myself for more noises, more flickering lights, and maybe more footprints. All I know is I won't open that door again unless I absolutely have to. And if I do, I need to be prepared for whatever is on the other side. Right now, I just want to make it through the night. Then maybe I'll pack my things, find a cheap motel, and come back in daylight with someone else. I don't care if the neighbors think I'm crazy. I'm not going down into that crawl space alone again. I can't shake the feeling that whoever was in those photos, whoever left those boxes for me to find, is still here, just waiting for me to drop my guard. I'm exhausted, but I can't imagine sleeping. I keep pacing around the living room, checking the hallway, checking the locks. My heart races at every little creak of the floorboards. My hands are trembling and I can't seem to steady them. I keep telling myself it's just an old house, that basements can be creepy. But then I remember the footprints and the boxes that hold things exactly my size. No, this is not just an old house. Something else is happening here. And it's not going to let me rest until I figure it out, or until it decides to show itself again. I walked into that theater on a rainy afternoon, holding a stack of old blueprints and a flashlight that flickered whenever I tapped it. The place was marked for demolition in less than a year, and I'd signed up to help with the restoration. My plan was simple: clear out debris, make notes of structural damage, and see if anything could be saved before the wrecking crew showed up. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. When I first pushed open those heavy front doors, the smell of mold and stale air rushed past my face. It wasn't strong enough to make me choke, but it clung to my nostrils. Inside, the lobby was dark, with a dusty chandelier that looked like it hadn't worked in decades. My shoes scraped against the cracked marble floor as I made my way to the ticket counter. Empty boards hung on the walls and the paint had flaked off in large patches. I heard distant dripping water from somewhere behind the concession stand, but I couldn't see any puddles yet. I switched on my flashlight and swept the beam around. It showed the peeling wallpaper and broken boards. No furniture remained, just outlines on the floor where chairs or tables had once been. My heart pounded a bit faster than normal. I told myself it was just the thrill of exploring a place that most people had forgotten. I found a corridor to the right that led to the backstage area. The corridor was long and unlit. Every step I took stirred up dust. The silence made my ears ring. I noticed footprints in the dust that weren't mine, maybe from the last restoration crew that gave up on the place. The corridor felt colder as I walked farther in. My skin prickled with goosebumps when I spotted old posters on the walls. Most of them were torn, but I could still see bits of show titles and actor names. I recognized one from the 1950s. It featured bold lettering and an image of a smiling man in a tuxedo. The corners were curled, and a spider's web stretched across the top, but it was a reminder that this theater had once been full of life. I turned a corner and found a series of dressing rooms. Each door had a small plaque with a faded name. The first one I entered smelled of rotten wood and something musty. I pointed my flashlight around and saw a few broken chairs, a shattered mirror, and a wardrobe rack with hangers still clinging to it. One of the hangers swayed a little, like I had brushed against it, but I hadn't touched anything. I stood still, feeling my chest tighten. I waited for some explanation, maybe a draft, maybe my own movement, but I felt no breeze. I backed out of the room, feeling a small chill in my stomach. The next few dressing rooms were mostly the same: broken lights, dusty floors, old wooden tables. In one room, I found a half-open trunk with tattered costumes that smelled like mildew. I nudged a piece of fabric with my foot. It disintegrated under the slightest pressure. There was a weird hush in the air, like the space was waiting for me to do something else. I tried to ignore the tension in my muscles and kept moving. Eventually, I reached a set of narrow stairs that led down to the backstage area. My flashlight revealed more scuffed walls and patches of mold. The stairs creaked under my weight. each sound echoing in the tight space. When I reached the bottom, I found a wide hallway with thick, heavy curtains on one end. I realized it was the back entrance to the main stage. I thought I heard movement behind the curtains, but it was faint, like shuffling feet. I froze for a second, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Then I told myself it was probably just my imagination. I took a few steps closer, but the movement stopped. There was no wind or draft, so I kept going until I stood right in front of the curtain. It was dark red, covered in dust, and had small tears in the fabric. I lifted a corner to peek onto the stage, but it was too dark to see much. All I could make out was a large open space with rows of old seats in the distance. I decided I'd check out the stage later. First, I wanted to survey the backstage itself, but just as I lowered the curtain, I heard a sound that made my hair stand on end. Applause. It wasn't a single clap. It sounded like a full audience clapping for a performer. I whipped around, flashing my light all over the hallway. Nobody was there. The applause faded, leaving me in total silence again. I noticed my palms were damp with sweat. My breathing felt shallow. My mind raced with questions. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that old theaters can play tricks on the ears. Maybe it was water dripping somewhere, echoing in a strange way. I decided to keep investigating. I followed a narrow passage off to the left, which led me deeper behind the stage. I found rope pulleys, scattered sandbags, and more broken props lying around. I picked up a wooden mask that was cracked down the middle. It was probably part of some performance from years ago. I set it aside and took another step forward. That's when I heard voices. Not whispers, but actual dialogue, like two actors rehearsing lines. I stood there, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The voices were clear but muffled, like they were coming through a wall. They rose in intensity, then quieted, then rose again. I couldn't make out the exact words, but I recognized the rhythm of people on a stage. I quickly walked back to the main corridor. The voices stopped immediately, replaced by the dull echo of my own footsteps. I felt unsteady. My stomach churned. I stopped and leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. I noticed the dust on my jacket and realized how long I'd been wandering around without a break. I turned off the flashlight for a moment to see if my eyes would adjust to the darkness. Without the beam, the corridor was almost pitch black, except for a sliver of light coming from somewhere near the stage. I flicked the flashlight back on and decided to head straight for the main area. I eventually found an entrance to the auditorium. The double doors were heavy and squeaked when I pushed them open. Inside, rows of seats spread out in front of me. The place was enormous, with a high ceiling and a balcony that looked unsafe. The carpets down the aisles were caked with dust. Bits of plaster had fallen from the ceiling, creating small piles on some seats. My footsteps echoed as I walked forward, shining the flashlight from one side to the other. I wanted to get a better look at the stage from this perspective, so I made my way down the center aisle. About halfway there, my flashlight dimmed. I smacked it a few times, and it flickered back to life, though weaker than before. When I reached the foot of the stage, I looked up. The curtains were drawn shut, but they swayed slightly from side to side. There was no draft. The air felt thick and still. My pulse pounded in my neck. I set my hand on the edge of the stage and hoisted myself up. Dust stirred around my feet when I landed on the old boards. The wood creaked loudly like it was protesting my weight. I stood still for a moment, listening. That's when I heard the music. It was faint, like an old record playing in another room. It had a tinny sound, maybe classical or orchestral. I couldn't pinpoint the melody. I stepped forward, and the music grew louder. I looked around for a speaker or a phonograph, but there was nothing. Just darkness, curtains, and silence except for that strange, distant tune. As I moved closer to the center of the stage, the curtains behind me fluttered again, but there was no wind. I spun around and shone my flashlight at them. The movement stopped. My heart hammered in my chest, my skin felt clammy. I took another few steps, scanning the backstage area. I saw shadows shifting along the drapes, but I couldn't see any person. My breathing grew shallow. I felt a strong urge to leave, but I pushed it down. I was here to help restore the place, or at least figure out if it was salvageable. I told myself I just needed a plan to deal with the structural damage, not ghosts. Still, the tension in my muscles refused to go away. I headed to the left wing of the stage where I found more ropes and pulleys. I noticed a control panel for the lights. Most of the switches were rusted or broken. I fiddled with a couple of knobs, hoping to get something to turn on. Nothing responded. A sudden shuffle behind me made me spin around. The curtain moved again, like someone was walking past it. I yelled out, "Is anybody there?" My voice echoed in the emptiness. No answer. I felt an odd mix of relief and dread. The applause I had heard earlier echoed in my mind. I couldn't explain it. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat go dry. I walked back to the center stage and glanced out at the auditorium seats. Rows of them stretched into darkness. Then, in the upper balcony, I saw what looked like a faint light. It was there for half a second, then it vanished. My chest tightened again. I waited for more movement, but there was only silence. The music I had heard moments before was gone. Suddenly, I felt a breeze against my neck. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned around slowly. The main curtain was pulled back a few inches, like someone had peeked out from backstage. I held my breath. Part of me wanted to dash off the stage and out the front doors, but I forced my legs to move carefully toward the gap in the curtain. My flashlight's beam landed on the dusty floor, revealing footprints that weren't mine. They circled in odd patterns. I knelt down, touching one of the footprints lightly. The dust around it looked recent, like it had been disturbed only minutes ago. I inched closer to the curtain gap and pushed it aside with my flashlight hand. Behind it was a small cluster of crates and more torn backdrops. Something shifted behind the crates, just a flicker of movement. I aimed my flashlight at the spot, but there was nothing there. I felt my pulse beating in my ears. My shirt stuck to my back. I let the curtain fall back in place, deciding I'd seen enough of that side. Maybe there was an open window or a draft I couldn't find. I tried to come up with logical explanations, but my thoughts kept racing back to the applause, the music, and those voices. I left the stage and went back down the aisle. My legs felt stiff, and I realized my hands were shaking. I gripped the flashlight tighter. I reached the lobby again and noticed how the rain outside had picked up. It drummed against the roof with a hollow sound. I tried the front doors to see if I could let in some natural light, but they were stuck. The hinges were jammed or rusted. I decided to circle around to the side exit. As I turned the corner, I heard that applause again, loud, enthusiastic, like a standing ovation. It echoed from the auditorium, rising and falling in waves. My ears burned. I glanced over my shoulder, breathing hard. The doors to the auditorium were wide open, though I'd left them shut. That made my mouth go dry. The applause continued for another few seconds, then stopped dead. I stood there, back pressed against the chipped wall. My breathing sounded like a hiss. I had never experienced anything like this before. My logic told me to leave, but my curiosity told me to find the source. After a few moments, I forced myself to walk back into the auditorium, determined to see if maybe some old speaker system was malfunctioning. But as soon as I stepped inside, everything was quiet again. The stage curtains were still, and there was no sign of any movement. My flashlight flickered, and I hit it a couple more times. The beam stayed weak, barely enough to see beyond a few rows of seats. Then I heard a single voice shout something. It sounded like someone calling a cue or maybe a line from a play. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent. I turned toward the stage. The curtains shifted again, like someone was running behind them. My knees felt unsteady, and I could feel sweat trickling down my temple. I climbed up the stage steps one more time, determined to tear that curtain open and put an end to this mystery. My hands trembled as I grabbed the heavy fabric. I flung it aside, revealing the same dark space with crates and pulleys. Nothing else. My flashlight illuminated the old wooden floor. Dust floated in the air. I took 2 slow steps, then heard something scrape across the floor behind me. It sounded like a footstep followed by a quick shuffle. I spun around. I saw nothing, just the set pieces and an empty stage. The tension in my chest was almost painful. I said quietly, "I'm just here to help. I'm trying to restore this place." My voice cracked. I felt foolish talking to empty space, but I had to say something. The air felt thick, and I could smell damp fabric and rotting wood. My heart pounded against my ribs. In the silence, I could almost hear it. My flashlight started to fail. The beam flickered so badly I could barely see. I fumbled in my pocket for extra batteries. My fingers shook as I tried to pop open the flashlight. A clang echoed from somewhere backstage, metal on metal. I dropped the batteries and heard them roll across the floor. I cursed under my breath. Without thinking, I bent down and felt around for them. I managed to grab one, but the other was gone. I jammed the single battery into the flashlight, hoping it would help. The beam stayed dim. Now I was in near darkness. I could see vague outlines of the stage, the first few rows of seats, and that was it. I took a slow breath and decided to leave. I'd come back another day with a better light and maybe a friend or coworker. As I started to walk away, I heard that old music again. This time it was louder. I could recognize a piano and maybe a violin. The melody was slow and sad. My stomach knotted up. I couldn't see the source, but it sounded like it was right behind me. I rushed forward, stumbling off the stage. My foot caught on something, and I fell to my knees. Pain shot up my legs. I hissed in discomfort and pushed myself up. The music faded as quickly as it had started. Limping slightly, I made my way down the aisle. My heart was racing. My hands felt clammy, and my teeth were clenched so tight my jaw hurt. I reached the lobby and forced the side door open with a hard shove. The rain hit me in the face as I stepped outside. The cool air felt like a relief. My clothes were damp with sweat, and my thoughts were spinning. I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel, breathing heavily, my mind trying to make sense of everything I'd heard in there. I didn't see any actual figures, but I sensed them. I didn't see an actual performance, but I heard it. My skin still tingled from the memory of that applause. I sat there in the driver's seat, listening to the rain slam against the roof of the car. My flashlight lay on the passenger seat, still flickering. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to calm my nerves. I thought about going back in right away, but my body was shaking too hard. I decided I needed a plan, better equipment, and maybe someone else to confirm what was happening. As I pulled out of the empty parking lot, I glanced back at the theater's dark outline. The windows were boarded up, but I imagined shadows moving inside. It felt like the place was watching me leave. I had never been so rattled by an old building. I promised myself I'd return, but not alone, and not unprepared. My mind was stuck on those faint voices and that phantom applause. I felt like they wanted me there, guiding me around, waiting for the final act I was too scared to face. I drove home, exhausted, confused, and strangely drawn to the next visit. But I knew I needed time to gather my courage. The theater wasn't going anywhere, and those voices, whatever they were, would be waiting. I still feel sweat on my palms when I think about my first night here. I remember standing on the front porch, holding a flashlight that flickered with a weak beam. I remember the tall grass swaying under a cold wind and the twisted branches creaking above me. I remember the uneasy sensation in my chest as I tried to convince myself that I was alone, even though I kept hearing low sounds in the distance. That was only the beginning. I moved to this remote property about 3 weeks ago. I wanted a quiet place where I could grow my own vegetables and escape the noise of the city. I'm not a complicated person. I just wanted a small patch of land, a modest house, and some peace. I'd saved up enough money to take a chance on this old place, and I thought the isolation would be refreshing. I liked the idea of being surrounded by nature, even if it meant dealing with rough terrain and overgrown weeds. I told myself I could handle the challenges. I wasn't expecting to deal with something I can't fully explain. The property sits at the end of a narrow dirt road. There's a single gate that creaks whenever I push it open. My house is a simple structure with 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living area. There's a short hallway leading to the back door. The windows are old and a bit cloudy. The roof looks worn in certain spots. I figured I would make repairs over time. There's a big plot of land out back that I hope to use for a vegetable garden. On the other sides, thick bushes and wild trees surround me. The trunks twist in strange angles, like they're bent under some invisible weight. At night, I notice the wind hissing through the leaves. It never sounds calm. It feels like a warning. I've tried to stick to a routine since I arrived. In the morning, I wake up early, boil water for coffee, and check the perimeter of my yard. I don't have a fence around most of it, so I like to see if there are any signs of animals or other trespassers. At first, it was just rabbits or deer prints. Sometimes small holes dug by armadillos or something similar. Nothing strange. Then, about a week ago, I started finding holes that didn't look normal. They were wide and deep, as if something large had clawed at the ground with aggressive force. The dirt around them was fresh and scattered in odd patterns. I saw footprints around those holes, but they were bigger than any tracks I've seen in my life. I couldn't match them to any animal I knew. The shape looked wrong. They had a strange arrangement of toes. Too many, I think. They sank deep into the soft soil, implying a lot of weight behind each step. I stared at those footprints for a long time. My heart thumped, and my mouth felt dry. I remember telling myself it had to be a stray dog or maybe a big cat. But my rational explanations didn't fit the size or the spacing. I couldn't figure out what would roam around at night, digging holes for no clear reason. I tried to brush it off. I went back inside, locked my doors, and kept myself busy cleaning up the kitchen. That night, the wind came back with more force. I could hear it pushing against the trees. Around midnight, I was half asleep on the couch when I heard a soft scraping noise on one of the walls. It sounded like long claws or nails dragging across old wood. I froze. I turned off the lamp and listened. My skin prickled and my breathing grew fast. The scraping stopped for a moment, then started again, closer to the back door. I picked up the flashlight I keep on the coffee table and stood up. My legs felt stiff. I moved slowly toward the back window. I lifted the curtain an inch and tried to peer outside, but everything was pitch black. The only thing I saw was the faint outline of tall grass and some tree trunks swaying in the wind. Then I heard a low growl. It wasn't loud, but it felt deliberate. It vibrated through the wall. I felt it in my stomach. I backed away from the window and stayed silent. My hand shook on the flashlight. I didn't want to open the door or shine a light outside. I just stayed there, pressed against the wall, breathing in shallow bursts. Eventually, the scraping moved along the outer boards and faded. I heard something rustling in the grass. Then it was gone. I spent the rest of that night in my room, lights off, door locked. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my ears straining for any new sounds. In the morning, I checked the walls outside. I found scratches that looked like claw marks, 5 distinct lines, some overlapping, digging into the wood in diagonal streaks. The lines were about an inch apart, suggesting something with a broad set of claws. The sight made my stomach tense. A part of me wanted to pretend it was a raccoon or a bobcat, but I couldn't ignore how big those marks were. I checked the ground for footprints, but I saw nothing new. The wind had swept away or disturbed most of the dirt. The only evidence was those deep scratches on the wall. I took a few pictures with my phone, but I didn't know who to show them to. My plan had always been to clear some of the brush around the house and start planting vegetables. I tried to stick to that plan, thinking that staying active would keep my mind off the night's events. During the day, I used a machete to chop at the tall grass. I wore thick boots and heavy jeans because the branches and thorns kept cutting at my legs. I sweated a lot. The humidity around here is intense, and the sun feels harsh when it's out. By the afternoon, I was usually exhausted. I remember one time I paused to catch my breath and heard a dull thud in the trees. It sounded like a heavy footstep. I turned around and saw a branch swaying, but there was no animal in sight. I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe a deer ran past. Maybe an old branch fell. But my nerves stayed on edge. My back felt rigid, and my eyes scanned every shadow. Sometimes I thought I saw movement, but it was always gone by the time I focused. The tall grass made it difficult to see anything clearly. The twisting trees created patterns that messed with my depth perception. I started feeling uneasy during the day, not just at night. After a few days, I noticed more holes in different parts of the property. They were scattered at random intervals. Some were near the back porch, some near the old tool shed, and others along the edge of the tree line. I tried filling one of them with dirt, patting it down firmly. The next morning, it was dug up again, deeper than before. There were new footprints around it, the same bizarre shape as before. The realization hit me hard. Whatever was digging these holes was persistent, and it was getting close to the house. At that point, I started sleeping in my clothes. I kept my boots by the bed and a flashlight and a sturdy hammer within arm's reach. I left some of the interior lights on, hoping that brightness might keep anything away. But the nights only got worse. The wind never let up, and I always heard rustling outside. Sometimes it was just the leaves. Other times I caught a faint growl or a heavy exhale, like something sniffing near the walls. My heart would pound, and my pulse would beat in my ears. My stomach would clench so hard it felt like I had been punched. My breath became shallow and quick. One night, about a week after I first heard the scraping, I woke up to a sudden bang against the back door. It wasn't gentle. The whole door rattled, and I shot up from bed. My first thought was to grab the hammer. My second thought was to turn on the bedroom lamp. But I hesitated, worried about drawing attention. I stepped toward the door that leads into the living area and listened. I heard claws raking the wood again, but this time it felt more aggressive. I imagined the paint chipping off with each pass of those claws. My heart raced. I tiptoed into the living room, flicked on a small lamp, and stood by the back door. I put my ear against the door. My pulse hammered in my throat. The scratching continued. Something was testing the door, pushing on it, almost like it was searching for a weak spot. I felt my chest tighten. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. I wanted to shout, but I couldn't make myself do it. Instead, I gripped the doorknob, hoping the lock would hold. After a minute or two, the pressure eased, and I heard a slow shuffle in the grass. Then silence. I didn't open the door. I waited another 5 minutes, breathing fast, sweat dripping down my neck. When I finally looked outside, I saw fresh gouges in the wood, deep lines longer than before. But the attacker was gone. I started thinking about leaving the property. But I'd spent all my savings on this place. I also felt a stubborn urge to stand my ground. This was my home now. I didn't want to give up. I decided to reinforce the doors. I found some spare boards in the shed and used nails to fasten them across the inside of the frames. I blocked the back door with a heavy table. I double-checked the windows to make sure they were locked. During the day, I kept an eye on the tree line, but I never saw anything. I only heard occasional rustling and glimpsed quick movements. It was maddening. On a bright afternoon, about 10 days in, I found another odd set of tracks near my makeshift garden area. They looked different from the first ones I saw. They were almost merged together, like something with a drag in its step. There was a piece of torn bark lying nearby, claw marks etched into it. My mouth went dry when I spotted it. I scanned the area for any sign of a nest or burrow, but nothing stood out except for tall weeds and twisted roots. I kicked at the ground, frustrated. I wasn't sure what I was dealing with, but I felt like I was being watched. A chill ran up my neck even though the sun was high. That night I tried to stay awake as long as I could, sitting on a chair near the window with the lights off. I wanted to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. Around midnight, the wind picked up. I heard the trees swaying and leaves tumbling across the yard. My eyes started to droop and my head bobbed. Then I heard a low growl near the front porch. I switched on the flashlight and aimed it through the window. I saw movement behind the half-dead bushes. I couldn't make out a clear shape. It ducked away before my light could settle on it. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My hands trembled, and my throat felt tight. A second later, I heard quick footsteps moving around the house toward the back. I heard branches snap. I jumped out of the chair and ran to the back window, shining the flashlight. Nothing. But I heard heavy breathing outside just beyond the window frame. I stepped back, nearly tripping on a chair. My heart hammered. My mouth felt like sand. Suddenly, the breathing stopped. Total silence. Even the wind paused. My ears rang. I stayed there, flashlight in hand, trying not to move. Then I heard a long scraping sound on the side wall. It traveled from one end to the other. I could hear it crossing the boards, inch by inch. My body felt locked up. My breathing was shallow and ragged. The scraping moved to the back door. I saw the doorknob twitch like something was testing it. I didn't know if it had hands or paws, but it was trying to grip the handle. My stomach lurched. I imagined it bursting in. I pictured myself swinging the hammer in a panic. My mind raced with stupid ideas. I wanted it to go away. After a few tries, the rattling stopped. I heard a low grunt, then the sound of something stepping off the porch. The boards creaked, then it moved into the yard. I heard tall grass swish, then it vanished into the night. I stayed up until dawn. My nerves felt shredded. At first light, I went out to inspect the damage. Claw marks again, more door scratches, but no new footprints. The ground outside the porch was disturbed, but I couldn't see a clear shape. It was like the creature disguised its tracks, or the wind wiped them away. I noticed a dent on the doorknob. That freaked me out even more. Whatever it was, it had enough strength to leave a small dent in metal. I've tried calling local animal control, but they don't take me seriously. The few neighbors I've spoken to just shrug and say, maybe there's a wild cat around. I don't feel like they believe me. Some nights I think about packing my truck and leaving, but I keep telling myself maybe I can solve this. I've started piling up rocks around the outside walls, thinking that might deter digging. I set up some noise traps, tins tied to strings around the perimeter, hoping I'll hear them if something roams around. So far, I only heard them clank once, 2 nights ago, and when I rushed out with my flashlight, the yard was empty. Still, I feel it watching me every time I step outside. I hear small movements behind thick bushes. I see branches shift even when the wind is calm. Some mornings, I discover fresh holes again, or claw marks in a different section of the house. And that constant feeling hovers in my mind. It's out there. It's aware of me. And it's not leaving. Each night, the wind starts up, the trees groan, and the darkness around this place seems to press in. My heart beats faster as soon as the sun goes down. My breathing gets shallow. My muscles stay tense. I jump at every small noise. I have no idea if this thing is an animal with unusual size or something I can't categorize. All I know is that the footprints, the scratches, and the roars are real. The feeling of being hunted is real. When morning comes, the footprints disappear, but the damage remains. The fresh claw marks on the walls, the holes in the ground, and the dented doorknob are enough proof for me. I don't know how long I can keep this up. I walk around with a permanent knot in my gut. My sleep is broken and restless. My arms and legs feel heavy during the day. My mind is fixed on the next night. I've never felt so vulnerable. For now, I'm still here. I have a hammer by my side, some boards reinforcing my doors, and a flashlight that I keep charged. I don't know what's coming next. But every night, when the wind picks up and the shadows stretch across my yard, I brace myself. I stand by the window, my heart pounding, waiting for the clawing to begin. And it always does. I never thought a simple frosted window could keep me awake at night, but it does. I sit here, in my small home office, staring at that glass pane that faces the yard. My chest feels tight every time I glance at it. I used to enjoy my evenings. The quiet helped me write my academic texts without interruption. Now I dread the moment the sun goes down. There's something behind that window, and it won't leave me alone. I want to explain how this started, though I'm still trying to make sense of it. I've been an academic writer for years. I work at home. I do most of my projects at night because I like the silence. My neighborhood is on the edge of a small town. Most people around here go to bed early. There are no bright streetlights near my house, just a few porch bulbs that fade out around midnight. My backyard has only twisted trees. I don't know how old they are, but they look ancient. Their branches extend in odd shapes, and I rarely see any birds nesting in them. They look dead, but they still have bark that peels in thin layers. During the day, it's just a barren sight. At night, it's worse. I can't see the details beyond the window because of the frosted glass, so there's only a blur of shadows. I've lived here for 5 years. The house is simple. 1 story, 2 bedrooms, a hallway that leads to a small living room and a kitchen. My office is a converted storage room. There's a desk, a chair, a few bookshelves, and that large frosted window in the back. I never cared that it was frosted because I didn't expect to look outside at night. I liked the privacy. My yard was never a place I enjoyed, so I kept the curtains open most times. I thought the faint outline of the trees sometimes gave me a calm feeling, until the symbols started to appear. I first noticed them a few weeks ago. It was around 2 in the morning. I was typing a summary for a research paper. My eyes were tired, so I pushed myself away from the desk and stretched my arms. I looked at the window. There was a strange smudge on it. I thought maybe I had touched the glass earlier with a sweaty hand, or maybe some moisture had formed. I got up to check. It looked like a swirl, a curved shape with a few lines crossing it. It wasn't big. It was about the size of my palm. It seemed to be on the inside of the glass because when I ran my finger on the surface, I could feel a tiny bit of dampness. It reminded me of how a finger leaves a line on a foggy mirror. I wiped it off with a rag and went back to work. The next night, there was another mark, and it was different. This one had more lines. It looked a bit sharper around the edges, and it had weird angles. I stood there, leaning close to the glass, trying to see if the mark was on the outside or inside. It was on the inside again. I rubbed it with my thumb. My heart was beating faster than normal because I remembered wiping the first mark off. I wondered if there was some moisture problem. I didn't see any leaks. The rest of the window was dry. Only that mark felt damp. I cleaned it again, this time with a paper towel. I tried not to think about it. I told myself it was just condensation. I sat down and wrote for another hour. But I kept glancing at the window, expecting to see another shape appear. My stomach felt uneasy. My shoulders were tense. I wrapped up my work and went to bed. On the 3rd night, I found a more complex symbol. It looked like a combination of circles and lines. They curved in a pattern that reminded me of some old letters I had seen in medieval manuscripts. I stared at it for a long moment. My neck felt hot. My mouth went dry. My scalp tingled. I wanted to open the window to see if something was on the other side, but I remembered that the symbol was on the inside. I felt my heart pounding. I considered taking a photo with my phone. I ended up just standing there, touching the edges with my fingertips. It felt damp again, like someone had pressed a wet finger against the glass. I went to the bathroom, got a dry cloth, and wiped it away. My chest felt tight. I left the room and made coffee, trying to calm down. A week went by. Each night I found a new symbol. Each one was more intricate. One had multiple triangles interlocking in a ring. Another had wavy lines that crossed through small circles. Another had a row of jagged shapes inside a single curved line. I tried drawing them on a piece of paper, but I got frustrated. They had odd proportions. They never looked right when I tried to copy them. I saved the notes anyway. They made me uneasy. They didn't look like letters from any language I recognized, but they felt old. I decided to keep my curtains shut, but I still knew the symbols were there. After a few days, I got desperate and taped a thick sheet of cardboard over the window. I didn't want to see that glass anymore. I forced myself to work with my back to the window, focusing on my laptop screen. My productivity dropped. I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt sweaty. My throat felt tight. My hands shook sometimes. One night I pulled the cardboard away and checked if anything had appeared. There were 4 new symbols side by side. My skin crawled. I saw small droplets forming lines, almost like runes. I couldn't stop staring. Then I saw a movement in my peripheral vision. It looked like a long, thin hand sliding away from the corner. When I turned my head, there was nothing there. I felt goosebumps all over my arms. I tried to breathe calmly, but my heart was racing. I almost dropped my phone. I convinced myself it was my imagination. I turned on the lights, checked the lock on the back door, and opened the window. I reached outside with my hand, feeling the cold air. The yard was still. The branches of those trees barely moved. The ground had scattered leaves, no footprints, no sign of anyone. I closed the window and locked it again. I touched the glass. The new symbols were still wet. I wiped them off, feeling a chill run down my spine. Each night, the pattern continued. I would start my work around midnight, and after a couple of hours, I would see a new symbol. Sometimes there were 2 or 3, always damp, always drawn on the inside. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, like a hand or a skinny arm. But whenever I turned, I saw nothing. I started losing sleep. My head ached from tension. My back felt stiff. My heart pounded whenever I stepped into my office. The nights felt long. The only sounds I heard were my own breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. I tried ignoring the window for a few nights. I kept my eyes on the computer screen, but every time I sensed something in the corner of my vision, my chest tightened. My hair stood on end. It felt like someone was standing just outside the window, pressing a finger against the glass. Sometimes it felt like they were inside. My eyes would dart to the corners of the room, but I never saw anyone. I started leaving lamps on. The overhead light in my office didn't feel like enough, so I added a small desk lamp and a floor lamp. Bright light helped me feel a bit safer, but the symbols kept appearing. I would check every hour. There would be nothing. Then, all of a sudden, another wet mark showed up. I used a small camera once. I positioned it on a tripod aimed at the window. I left it recording while I tried to write. After an hour, I checked the footage. The camera only showed the window. No movement, no shapes. The symbol appeared between frames. One moment the glass was clean, and the next moment the symbol was there. My stomach turned. I clenched my teeth. I felt sweat beading on my forehead. I started hearing faint tapping sounds from the direction of the window, like a single knock or a gentle scratch. I would jump in my seat and stare at the glass. My pulse would pound in my ears. My mind felt cloudy. I couldn't focus on my writing. My deadlines got harder to meet. I started finishing my work during the day, but that meant I was awake at odd hours, and my body felt worn out. One evening, I decided to confront whatever was doing this. I waited for the tapping sound. I stood up and walked to the window. My hands were shaking. I pulled the curtains aside and pressed my face close to the frosted glass. I could see the vague outline of trees, but nothing else. I waited. I listened to my own heartbeat. Then I heard a soft sound. It was like a fingertip sliding across damp glass. The hair on my neck stood up. My jaw tensed. I stayed still. Then I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision again. It looked like a pale, elongated shape sliding away from view. I jerked my head to the side, but there was nothing. I pressed my hand against the window. The symbol was fresh. I felt moisture. My stomach flipped. I pulled my hand back and stepped away. My breath was shallow. I became obsessed with cleaning the window. I would wipe it down every 10 minutes, hoping to catch the moment the symbol formed. I never did. It always appeared when I wasn't looking. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My muscles felt sore. I drank too much coffee, and my nerves were frayed. The symbols got more detailed. Some had overlapping lines that formed strange shapes. Others had dots arranged along swirling curves. One night, I heard the tapping again, louder this time. I shot to my feet and ran to the back door. I swung it open and stepped outside. The cold air hit my face. I had a flashlight in my hand. I pointed it at the trees. Nothing moved. The branches were twisted and the bark looked rough, but I saw no sign of a person or an animal. The ground was uneven. My shoes crunched on dead leaves. I scanned around the house. Everything was still. I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't see anyone. I stayed out there for a minute, shivering, trying to catch my breath. I went back inside, locked the door, and grabbed a hammer. I nailed 2 wooden boards across the frosted window. I didn't even measure properly. I just wanted to block it. The pounding of the hammer against the wall echoed in my office. My hands shook. My heart raced. When I finished, I stepped back and stared at my crude barricade. The boards were crooked, but they covered most of the glass. I slumped into my desk chair. My arms were sore from hammering. My eyes felt heavy. My head ached. I tried to sleep in my office that night. I figured if I stayed close, maybe I could hear if something tried to remove the boards. I propped myself on a small couch against the opposite wall. I kept the hammer next to me, in case I needed it. My mind wouldn't calm down. I felt my pulse throbbing in my temples. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a soft thud. My throat tightened. I grabbed the hammer and stood up. The boards were still there. I walked closer, pressing my ear to them. There was a scratching sound, like fingernails running along the wood. I froze. My palms were sweaty. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. The scratching stopped. I stayed there, listening, for what felt like a full minute. Then I heard a soft tap. Just once. I couldn't move. I stood still, breathing through my mouth, trying not to make a sound. After a few more seconds of silence, I lifted the hammer and pried one of the boards back just enough to peek through. I saw the frosted glass behind it, smeared with a new symbol. It had curved lines that looped into each other. I saw a faint outline of something pale slipping out of view. My eyes watered. My hands shook. I couldn't bring myself to yank the board off completely. I pushed it back into place and hammered the nails in deeper. Now I'm trapped in a loop. Every night there's a new mark, even though I can't see it directly. Sometimes I peek through the edges of the boards and catch a damp symbol. Sometimes I hear tapping or scraping. My stomach twists every time. My hair stands up whenever I sense movement. I can't think about anything else. I avoid the room during the day because I feel sick whenever I remember the night. A few days ago, I considered moving. I even looked at listings online, but I realized I can't leave yet. I don't have enough savings to just break my lease. This is my house, and I have no immediate plan to relocate. I tried sleeping in the living room, but I heard noises from the office at night. Little thuds, subtle knocks, sometimes a faint dragging sound. I keep checking, but there's never anyone there. The boards stay in place, though. I keep finding new damp lines if I look between the gaps. My chest tightens every time I realize the marks are forming in front of me, and I can't stop it. I can't call the police because there's no sign of a break-in. There's no physical damage other than my boarded window, which I did myself. I can't explain the wet symbols on the glass. I've tried taking photos again, but everything looks smudged. My phone can't capture the details. It all appears like random moisture. Yet I see the patterns clearly when I look with my own eyes. They're getting more complicated. They have more lines, more angles, more swirling shapes every time. I'm writing this at my desk with my back to the boarded window. My fingers keep trembling. My neck is stiff. I feel a knot in my stomach. Every so often I hear a faint scratch. I don't want to turn around, but I can't help it. My eyes flick to the edges of the boards. The rest of the room is quiet. My laptop hums. The overhead light flickers sometimes. I keep blinking, trying to stay alert. My mouth feels dry. My arms feel heavy. I don't know what's behind that window. I only know it won't go away. I'm tired of feeling this crawling tension under my skin. I'm tired of tapping sounds and dripping symbols. I'm scared to sleep, but I can't stay awake forever. It feels like a bad loop that I can't escape. I guess I'll keep writing. It's all I can do. My heart's racing even now, waiting for the next tap, waiting for a new shape to appear between those boards. I can't see it directly, but I know it's happening. Sometimes I feel air on the back of my neck, like a gentle breath, even though the windows are sealed and the door is locked. My eyes burn. My hands sweat on the keyboard. Every hair on my arms is raised. I'm convinced there's something behind that frosted glass. It's drawing those symbols, waiting for me to look. I don't know what it wants, I just know I'm here in this chair staring at the boards, waiting for dawn. I don't hear tapping right now, but I'm sure it will come back. Tonight isn't over yet. I felt drawn to that mirror the moment I saw it in the old warehouse. It was late afternoon and I was tired from a day of searching for new pieces for my antique shop. The place smelled of dust and damp boxes. I was about to leave when my flashlight passed over the ornate frame leaning against a stack of wooden crates. Something about the dull surface of the glass pulled me closer. I hadn't planned on buying a mirror that day, but I couldn't look away from it. Its design wasn't just ornate. It was excessive, like it was created to grab attention. My heart raced a little when I ran my hand over the carved wood. The reflection was dim, almost opaque, and I had an odd feeling that it was looking back at me, even though I could barely see my own shape in it. I'm an antiquarian and I've seen a lot of unusual pieces in my life. I've handled furniture from centuries ago, I've sold entire collections to museums, and I've kept strange objects in my back room for months while waiting for the right buyer. But this mirror felt different. I can't explain why. Maybe it was my mood that day. Maybe I was just eager to find something special. All I know is, I paid the man who ran that warehouse without even bargaining much. Then I took the mirror home in my truck. I wedged it carefully between some old chairs in the back. The frame was heavier than I expected, and I had to use a small cart to wheel it into my house. I locked up my shop for the day, turned off the lights in the front room, and went upstairs with the mirror. My house is old, but I like it that way. It has squeaky floors, narrow hallways, and the scent of years of polish in the air. I put the mirror in my study because that's where I keep the items I plan to research more thoroughly. I leaned it against the wall near my large desk and turned on the overhead light. The moment I stepped back, I felt a chill. It wasn't cold in the room, but something made my hair stand on end. The mirror's reflection was so faded that I couldn't see the details of my face, just a faint outline of my head and shoulders. My chest felt tight, and my legs went stiff. I stood there for a minute, thinking maybe I was just tired. Then I chuckled to myself and left the room to change clothes. I wanted to make some tea and relax before examining it further. That night, though, I couldn't get the mirror out of my head. I felt as if it was calling me, which sounds ridiculous when I say it, but I really did feel that tug. Around 11, I went back into the study with a small notebook and a pen. I flipped on a floor lamp and pulled up a chair close to the mirror. When I looked at it, I noticed something strange. My reflection stayed in the glass even after I shifted my position. It was only for a split second, but it was enough to startle me. I blinked, thinking maybe the lighting was playing tricks on my eyes. I leaned in, studying the glass. The surface looked dusty from the inside. The top layer was polished, but behind that, it was like a fog. I swore I could see movements in that haze, but nothing clear. My pulse sped up and my mouth went dry. I told myself I was seeing my own shape in a weird way, so I decided to move from side to side and watch carefully. Sure enough, my reflection lagged behind me, like a delayed video feed. I felt my scalp prickle. My right hand was trembling. I wiped my palm on my pants. I even rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I decided to step away and turn off the lamp. The moment the room went dark, I had a sudden urge to turn it back on. I hit the switch again and everything was normal. The reflection was just as dull, but I didn't see the lag anymore. I laughed quietly, feeling a bit silly, and wrote a note in my notebook. Mirror reflection delay, possibly a trick of the light. Then I went to bed. I tried to forget about it, but I kept tossing and turning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection staring back at me with a slight delay. The next morning, I woke up early and went straight to the study with my coffee. The mirror looked the same, only now there was a faint smear across the surface. I hadn't touched it with my bare hands the night before, so I guessed maybe I had brushed against it by accident. I leaned in and saw what looked like the outline of a handprint, but it was larger than mine. The fingers were spread out, and I could see each groove as if it was pressed from the inside of the glass. My stomach twisted and my heartbeat got heavy. I quickly checked my own hand against it, but the size didn't match. The shape was warped too, like someone had pressed their hand with force and dragged it slightly downward. I tried to clean it with a dry cloth. Nothing changed. I used a little glass cleaner, but the smear stayed there. It was inside the mirror, not on the surface. I felt a surge of panic. I left the room, shut the door, and decided to open my shop. I had customers to serve, phone calls to return, and items to organize. Work always clears my head. But all day, I had that uneasy feeling that I wasn't alone. Even when I was in the front of the shop talking to a customer about an old clock, I felt like there were eyes on me. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there. It was just air. By evening, I forced myself to go back upstairs. I turned on every light I could. The study looked normal enough, except the mirror seemed darker than before. I didn't see my reflection right away. Then I stepped in front of it, and something else was there beside me in the glass. It was a dark shape, just off to the left side. It stood at my shoulder level, but it had no clear outline. I saw a faint movement, like it was turning its head toward me. I froze. My throat felt tight, and I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears. My hands went numb. I stared, trying to make out what the shape looked like. It was gone in an instant. My reflection stayed there, but the shape disappeared. 2 pale handprints remained on the inside of the mirror, right where that shadow had been. I swallowed hard and reached forward. My fingertips touched the cold glass. I could see my reflection's lips parting in fear. Then I noticed that my reflection was still looking straight ahead, even though I had turned my head slightly. That freaked me out more than the shadow itself. I backed away from the mirror and almost tripped over the chair. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard. I wanted to smash the mirror, but I also couldn't break such a rare piece. As crazy as it sounds, I also didn't want to free whatever was inside it, if there was something in there at all. That night I decided to sleep downstairs on the sofa. I felt watched everywhere I went. I started double-checking every door and window in the house, convinced someone might be inside. I found nothing, but I couldn't relax. I dozed off around 2 in the morning with the TV on. I dreamed about the mirror, but the dream was fragmented. I kept seeing those handprints and hearing a faint tapping like fingernails on glass. In the days that followed, I tried to carry on with my normal routine. I went to the shop. I organized my inventory. I worked on some restoration projects, but every time I got home I had to walk past the study to get to my bedroom. I could sense something pulling me toward the mirror. I tried leaving the lights on in the study all day, but that didn't help. At night, the reflection in the mirror seemed to glow faintly, even without any lights on. I tested that by turning off all the lamps and shutting the curtains. A soft, grayish light hovered behind the glass. One evening I mustered the courage to take a closer look again. I stood in front of the mirror with a flashlight. My reflection was there, but there was a slight delay whenever I moved. My arms and legs felt heavy, and my heart was beating so fast it hurt. Then I saw a figure behind me, as if it was standing a few feet back. The figure was tall and slender. The head was tilted at an odd angle. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was closer to me in the reflection, as if it moved forward when I wasn't looking. I felt like I was going to throw up. I steadied myself against the desk. I tried to touch the glass again, but the figure vanished, leaving those smeared handprints. Over the next week, I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. I noticed that every morning, the air in the hallway outside my bedroom smelled stale and cold. My skin would break out in goosebumps whenever I walked by the study. One night, I heard a soft scraping sound coming from behind the door. It sounded like fingernails dragging across the surface of the mirror. I stood in the hallway listening, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Then it stopped. I wanted to call someone, but I couldn't imagine what I'd say. My new Victorian mirror seems haunted. Come check it out. That would sound insane. I tried covering the mirror with a thick blanket once. When I did that, I felt a sharp chill run through the room. My teeth started chattering, and I got dizzy. After a few minutes, I heard a faint tapping from inside the mirror. It was slow and rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. I yanked the blanket off, and the tapping stopped. Then I saw new handprints on the inside of the glass, like whoever or whatever was in there wanted me to keep it uncovered. The handprints were more defined now, with long fingers and nails that left thin scratches along the edges. I considered getting rid of the mirror, but I hesitated. My professional side kept telling me it was a rare piece. Part of me also felt responsible for it. I couldn't just drop it off somewhere or destroy it. I thought about contacting another dealer to see if they knew anything about Victorian mirrors with these properties, but I didn't want to sound ridiculous. Still, the idea of selling it crossed my mind more than once. The problem was I didn't want to pass this issue on to someone else. I felt stuck. Every night, I sensed something watching me. I started noticing random cold spots in other parts of the house. My study felt like the center of it all, though. That's where the mirror was. Sometimes I'd go in during the day and see my reflection just fine, with no delay. Then I'd catch a glimpse of movement behind me. I'd whirl around and nothing would be there. My phone camera never picked up anything unusual either. I tried recording the mirror while I moved around, but the footage only showed a normal reflection. No delay, no figure. It was like the mirror only misbehaved when it knew I was watching it directly. One day, after closing the shop, I decided to research Victorian mirrors. I checked old catalogs, read about rumored cursed objects, and tried to find any references to mirrors that held lingering reflections. I came across a few vague stories, but nothing concrete. Most were old wives' tales about mirrors that trapped souls. I didn't want to think about that. It made me nauseous. I tried to ignore those stories, but they stuck in my head. Sometimes I felt like the mirror wanted me to come closer, to press my hand against the glass and see what would happen. I never let myself do it for more than a second. Over time, the handprints got more frequent. I'd wake up, go to the study, and see them in different spots on the glass. Sometimes there'd be smudges like someone had dragged their hands down the inside. On 2 occasions, I saw what looked like long scratches near the top. It didn't crack the glass, but the surface had these faint lines, as if something was sliding its nails along the inside. My stomach would churn every time I saw a new mark. My hands would sweat, and I'd curse under my breath. I started leaving the study door shut most of the time, but the weird sounds still happened at night. The feeling of being watched never left. One evening, I caught my reflection moving on its own for the first time. I was standing about 6 feet from the mirror, looking at the frame. Then in the corner of my eye, I saw my reflection tilt its head, even though I was standing perfectly still. I felt my legs weaken. The reflection turned its head to look directly at me, and my vision swam. I thought I was going to faint. I stepped back, and I heard the wood floor creak under my feet. My reflection stayed there, head tilted, eyes staring. A second later, it snapped back to normal, copying my actual posture. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath. I haven't destroyed the mirror yet. It's still in my study as I speak. I don't know if I'm making a mistake by keeping it. Every night I dread the thought of going upstairs. My skin prickles, and my heart pounds whenever I think about it. Sometimes I wonder if it's feeding off my fear, but I can't say for sure. All I can say is, the reflection lags behind me. The figure appears sometimes, and those handprints never stop showing up. I've thought about covering it up again, but I'm scared of the tapping. I feel it might escalate if I try to seal it away. So that's the situation. I'm an antiquarian, and I've got this Victorian mirror that refuses to behave like a normal piece of furniture. Its reflection lingers. It shows figures that aren't there, and it leaves handprints that seem pressed from the inside. I feel watched all the time, and I don't sleep well anymore. I keep hoping I'll wake up one morning and it'll be normal, that maybe this was all in my head. But every time I check, there's a new sign that something's in there, trying to get out or pull me in. And I'm left with no idea what to do next.